Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Robert Pointer. Robert Pointer was known to be a kind man and to help others when they needed it. His children were always his top priority. Robert had 3 daughters, Grace being the youngest from his second marriage. Robert had 2 daughters from his first marriage, his eldest daughter Nicole and his second daughter Natalie. After about 20 years of marriage to Robert, Amy Pointer began to notice changes in his behavior that made her suspicious. Robert began to leave the house more often and spend more time away from his family. Their eldest daughter, Nicole, soon discovered that her father had a second cell phone. It turned out that he was secretly dating another woman named Chasey. At the time they met, Chasey was working as a nurse and they were introduced by a mutual friend. Chasey fell in love with him and decided to pursue the relationship, despite knowing that he was married with children. Chasey soon discovered that Robert was having marital problems, which led her to frequently visit the fire station to talk to him. Despite being married for 20 years, Robert succumbed to temptation and began an affair with Chasey, eventually leaving his wife, Amy. In December 2007, Robert officially began dating Chasey, and by May 2009, she was pregnant. They married on December 28. At the time, Robert was 40 years old, while Chasey was 22. She claimed that she was very happy with her husband. Unfortunately, this happiness did not last long. Over time, her feelings declined, and she began to believe that marriage was a mistake. Chasey later described her relationship with Robert as a foolish decision and a mistake of youth. On September 9, 2016, Chasey called 911 in a state of panic and distress. She asked the police to rush to a rural road, 38 kilometers from the city, where she was staying with her husband. During the call, she expressed her concern for his safety. When the police arrived around midnight, they found a car parked nearby with Chasey sitting in the car. She had blood on her shoulders and body, but she did not appear to be injured. According to Chasey, while waiting for the police, she held her husband's head. She stayed by his side the entire time. In the car was Robert Pointer, who was injured. Chasey had blood on her shoulders, shirt, and legs, but it was not hers and she was not injured. Police quickly discovered a wound to his head. Chasey reported that she saw an attacker dressed in dark clothing attack Robert. She was still terrified that the attacker might return, but she couldn't get out because the car was stuck. In addition, her husband needed urgent medical help. Sadly, by the time the ambulance arrived, Robert was dead, and it was too late to save him. Chasey shared that it was impossible to understand who would attack them in the dark. Robert. Her husband was a good man, a firefighter for many years, and had become a captain. She didn't see the attacker's face and couldn't provide any details about them. Overwhelmed, she began to have difficulty breathing. Eventually, a doctor stabilized her breathing, allowing her to recount the events leading up to the murder. That evening, Chasey, 29, was on her way to meet her husband at a fast food restaurant in Rossi, Texas. She was late and got lost in the dark, missed a turn, and drove 5 kilometers in the opposite direction. When she realized her mistake, she decided not to turn around and continued driving. She spotted a country road leading into a field and thought it might help her get through. Unfortunately, the road was muddy and her car got stuck. She couldn't get out. In fact, it was a road that farmers used tractors on. It was unusual for Chasey to choose this route, as it was clearly not suitable for her car. Chasey then called Robert and knew he was nearby, so she asked him for help. He quickly ran to help her. When he arrived, he parked along the side of the road. Chasey, who was waiting for him, pointed out where her car was parked. He left the car and headed toward his wife's car, moving into the darkness. Chasey stayed behind, but after a few minutes, she heard an explosion. Fearing for Robert's safety, she ran to her car and found him injured and slumped in the passenger seat. In a panic, Chasey called the police. While calling the police, she noticed a suspicious dark figure in the distance between some trees. She believed it was the killer. Fearing for her life, she realized that this man had no reason to kill Robert, which made her worry that she might be the attacker's target. Despite her fear, she did not want to leave Robert, so she chose to get into the car with him. Robert Pointer, 47, was a respected firefighter. He worked at a fire station near University Park in Dallas, Texas for 19 years, eventually becoming a captain and saving many lives. Robert's sudden death was a huge loss to his children and family. The police needed to uncover the truth behind his death. Robert's young wife, Chasey, had a hard time getting over the tragedy and gave vague and inconsistent statements to the police. The officers who arrived at the scene began to doubt her credibility. On a remote road, an attacker inexplicably decided to kill a stranger. Robert was attacked as soon as he entered the area. It was unclear why the killer did not attack Chasey. The police found this puzzling. They saw no struggle or motive for the attack. The killer emerged silently from the shadows and attacked Robert while he was in his car. Chasey provided information about her marriage and her relationship with Robert. She explained that the problems had begun years ago, almost breaking up their marriage. A significant concern for her was Robert's intention to gain custody of their daughter if they divorced. Chasey spoke to the police for over an hour, and as the conversation progressed, she shared more details, not only about her relationship with Robert, but also about the assault. Chasey explained that their marriage had deteriorated. They had been sleeping in separate rooms for 3 years. She expressed that she did not feel true love and believed that Robert still loved his ex-wife. Chasey began to claim that Robert was a cruel man because he had been taking testosterone injections to increase his hormone levels. She claimed that these injections made him more aggressive and that he frequently used force on her. Chasey accused Robert of humiliating her in various ways, including verbal and physical abuse. Eventually, the police decided to release her on bail while they continued to investigate the case. The police spoke to Robert's first wife, Amy, who disagreed with Chasey's claims. She said that Robert had never had a testosterone problem and that being cruel or irritable was not in his character at all. This view was supported by his children, relatives, and co-workers. Notably, his daughter shared that she lived with her father and stepmother for 6 months when she was 16 and had never witnessed him lose his temper or act cruelly. This view was shared by his other daughters. Chasey later attempted to deny the accusations against her, arguing that the daughters from Robert's first marriage had been hostile to her from the start because they viewed her as a homewrecker. She explained that she chose not to report the domestic violence to the police because she did not want to damage Robert's career. Chasey maintained that she had tried to save their relationship. During her interactions and interviews with Robert's daughter, Natalie, she said that she had discovered that Chasey had been unfaithful to her father. Natalie discovered evidence of the affair on Chasey's computer. There was an open social media tab showing conversations with multiple men. After this discovery, Natalie began to realize that her stepmother frequently left the house for several hours while her father worked the night shift at the fire department. Meanwhile, their sister would wake up at night, crying and calling for her mother. Natalie was furious and spoke to her father, presenting clear evidence of the situation. This revelation was a significant shock to Robert, and he considered filing for divorce. However, he ultimately decided against it, choosing instead to try to save his marriage. According to Robert's children, he did not want to leave Chasey for the sake of their young daughter. He made efforts to improve their relationship, but it seemed to be to no avail. Robert then installed a surveillance camera on the front door. Just 12 days before the murder, the camera recorded an unknown man with Chasey. The police began to suspect Chasey. Despite the police's skepticism, she continued to tell her story, constantly adding details that seemed inconsistent. With each conversation with the police, more inconsistencies emerged in her story, making it less believable. Interestingly, she publicly referred to Michael Garza as her lover. During Chasey's conversations with the police, she often paused for long periods before answering police questions. Her interactions with the police seemed like an attempt to mislead them. She claimed that Robert had decided to file for divorce after discovering she was seeing Michael. Robert confided in his friends at the fire department, who suggested that he consider ending the marriage because they could see that he and Chasey were not compatible. Robert still held out hope of saving the relationship and decided to take his family on a vacation to Mexico. However, the trip did not go as planned, and on the second day, a conflict arose. Robert noticed that Chasey was talking excitedly on the phone and believed that she was still in contact with her lover and had little interest in enjoying their vacation. On Wednesday, they returned from Mexico, and Robert confessed that he could no longer stand the situation and filed for divorce. By Friday, Robert was murdered. After police questioned Chasey, she claimed that despite the affair, she still loved Robert and wanted to save their marriage. To that end, she had a date with Robert at a restaurant that night, hoping to reconnect. Chasey then repeated her story about a mysterious stranger attacking Robert. After 2 hours of questioning, Chasey changed her story and revealed that she knew the killer. It was her lover, Michael Garza, who was in the passenger seat of her car at the time of the murder. Chasey's story kept changing. She claimed that shortly before the tragedy, she had told Michael about Robert's anger issues. She shared the abuse she had suffered for years. This prompted Michael to attack Robert. On the night of the incident, Chasey suggested they scare Robert so he would stop mistreating her. They had planned to create a situation where the car would appear to be stuck on a deserted road. Chasey insisted that she did not see the weapon Michael was carrying, that it was not part of their plan. Michael said that he would wait for Robert and asked Chasey to call her husband. Now, Chasey said that Michael had set up the ambush. When her husband arrived, she noticed something touching. Robert was wearing the same perfume he had worn on their wedding day, which she thought was his way of trying to please her. Chasey joked about it, and Robert laughed. Although the atmosphere was light, her husband only had a few minutes to live. Chasey told the police that as soon as her husband got into the car, she yelled at him to stop. She claimed that she was trying to stop Michael from escalating the situation. She claimed she had no idea there was a weapon in the car, saying she had just realized something was wrong and wanted to stop a fight. However, shortly after she screamed, an explosion was heard. When Chasey called for help, Michael snatched the phone out of her hand and threw it on the ground before disappearing. After reviewing all the false information and false statements, the police concluded that Chasey was involved in the murder. They believed that she played a key role in the plan and was fully aware of what was going to happen. Chasey was then arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit murder. At the same time, the police began searching for Chasey's boyfriend, Michael. On September 15, 2016, Robert Pointer was buried. Firefighters from all over Texas attended his funeral. His family revealed that in his final days, he was actually ready to end his relationship with Chasey, as he seemed very tired of the way she treated him. About a week before his death, Robert contacted a divorce attorney. The day before the tragedy, he posted a distressing message on social media, expressing his fear of a surprise attack. During this time, he was selling the family home and seeking custody of his daughter from his second marriage. The next day, Robert died, and police believe it was more than just a coincidence. They believe it was a planned murder. Police discovered significant evidence on Chasey's cell phone and computer that suggested she was looking for someone to kill her husband. Numerous text messages were sent to Chasey's lovers, and police identified at least 4 men with whom she was having affairs at the time. Of these, Chasey realized that Michael was the most vulnerable. She then began to carry out her deception. Her strategy was to convince Michael that Robert was a danger to her. She portrayed herself as a victim, claiming that she had been subjected to domestic violence. Although she told a similar story to all four lovers, only Michael was manipulated. While on vacation in Mexico, Chasey texted him, expressing fear for her life. Chasey instructed Michael that if she did not return from the trip, he should contact the police and report her as a victim of Robert. In response to the text message, Michael stated that he would kill Robert. During questioning, Chasey explained that she thought it was a joke. Police also spoke with Chasey's other lover, Golden. He said that Chasey had told him alarming stories about Robert, claiming that her ex-husband was stalking her. However, Golden did not believe her and advised her to contact the police. Although Chasey claimed to have been abused, police were unable to find any evidence to support her accusations against Robert. Neighbors and relatives did not report any problems or domestic incidents. No one ever saw any bruises on Chasey, even at the time of her husband's death. Chasey was later examined and found no signs of physical abuse. People around him confirmed that Robert was one of the kindest people they knew. Police are working to clarify the details surrounding the incident. Michael had fled. Although police searched his home, he was nowhere to be found. However, Michael turned himself in the next day. He was charged with the murder of Robert Pointer. Michael was uncooperative and refused to talk to the police. At that time, the police did not have the murder weapon and were searching for it, but were unsuccessful. Fortunately, 5 weeks after the murder, a farmer reported finding a shotgun while plowing a field, located a few hundred yards from where Robert was killed. The shotgun was still loaded and the bullets matched the bullets that killed Robert. In addition, a shirt was found next to the murder weapon and its DNA was confirmed to be Michael's. The police contacted Chasey again and she eventually admitted that she knew about the existence of the murder weapon. However, she maintained that she had no involvement in the planning of the crime. On July 10, 2018, Michael Garza's trial began. During the hearing, Michael continued to maintain his innocence and made a surprising statement. He said that he had taken the weapon from his brother, but insisted that he had not intended to kill Robert. Instead, he had given it to Chasey at her request. Michael provided an alibi, saying that he was at his farm, a few dozen miles from the crime scene, tending to a sick cow at the time of the massacre. However, he was unable to provide his alibi. Despite his efforts to defend himself, the jury did not believe Michael. On July 20, he was convicted of murder and sentenced to 99 years in prison. The prosecutor's office claimed that Chasey was the one who orchestrated the massacre. It was clear that Michael could not have lured Robert to that remote country road alone. Chasey was an accomplice in the scheme. The prosecutor presented Chasey's text messages to expose Chasey's true intentions. She used Michael as a pawn, fooling him into thinking she truly loved him. In reality, he was naive. After Robert's murder and her interactions with the police, Chasey planned to spend the night with another lover, as revealed in her text messages. Chasey's attorney argued that it was an out-of-control accident and not Chasey's fault. The defense argued that if there had been a secret plan, the real culprit would not have called the police after the murder. Instead, they would try to cover up their actions. The prosecution argued that Chasey had acted out of fear. Although Chasey did not testify at trial, the jury saw video of her holding her head and saying, "Oh no, what have I done?" This was considered a confession in relation to her husband's murder. After 4 hours of deliberation, the jury found Chasey Pointer guilty of murder and sentenced her to 30 years in prison. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Courtney Schulhoff. Courtney Schulhoff was born in 1987 in Florida to Stephen and Tracy. While details about her childhood are limited, we do know that her parents divorced when she was young, which was a challenging experience for her. After the divorce, her mother moved out and Courtney stayed with her father. Eventually, Stephen faced significant financial problems, which led to their move. In 2003, Courtney attended Lyman High School. She was a hard-working student at first, but after her parents divorced, her grades began to drop rapidly. She rarely attended school, stopped trying, and became a poor student. Outside of school, Courtney's personality also changed. She began hanging out with a group of friends who were known for bad behavior, which negatively affected her. Tensions between Courtney and her father Stephen escalate, forcing her to temporarily move in with her mother Tracy. However, this arrangement does not last long. Tracy cannot accept the changes in Courtney, so Stephen has no choice but to welcome her back home. Once again, Courtney and her father face unresolved issues, including her difficulties with school. During this time, Courtney and her friends often gather at the racetrack across from her school, where she meets and begins dating a 20-year-old college student named Michael. Michael Morin was a former high school football player who, unlike Courtney, had performed well academically. He received straight A's and was now attending a nearby college. His parents had high expectations for him, but everything changed after he met Courtney. After a few weeks of talking, they began spending all their free time together. Courtney's father, Stephen, was extremely upset about her poor grades, and this only intensified when he learned about her decision to be with Michael. He quickly started blaming Michael for this choice. Their relationship was already strained, and this situation made it worse. Courtney felt that her father didn't want her to be happy. She tried to explain that Michael was a good person, but Stephen refused to see him in that way. He had heard rumors about Michael being involved in car theft and wanted to caution Courtney that no matter what Michael did, he would never earn her father's approval. After a series of arguments, Courtney began to accuse her father of being abusive, and there was some evidence to support her accusations. One day, when Courtney invited some friends over, including Michael, her father Stephen came home earlier than expected, leading to an altercation. While Courtney and her friends were drinking and smoking, Stephen suddenly entered the room. Enraged, he yelled at his daughter for throwing a party without his permission. After a brief argument, Stephen punched Courtney in the face in front of her friends. The situation between Courtney and her father, Stephen, remained tense. Although Courtney had stopped going to school, she refused to find a job and frequently used her father's credit card without asking. She would come home with new clothes and items purchased online. By this time, Stephen's financial situation had worsened, making things even more challenging. For several months, Courtney continued her troubling behavior, often sneaking Michael into their home at night while her father was asleep. Eventually, Stephen prohibited Courtney from seeing her boyfriend, but she ignored his wishes and invited Michael over whenever she pleased. Every conversation between Courtney and her father focused on his harsh criticism of Michael. As the months passed, the situation became increasingly difficult. One day, Stephen checked his bank account and noticed some money missing. He called the police, reporting his daughter to them, apparently to teach her a lesson. After speaking with the police, Courtney returned home, now much more afraid of her father. She began to see him as strict, unkind, and a real threat. She devised a plan, determined to break free from Stephen's control. By the end of 2003, Stephen was in a relationship with a woman named Elaine. During this same time, Courtney was working towards earning her high school diploma while continuing to date Michael. Frustrated by Courtney's father's efforts to control their relationship, the couple decided to run away. However, they faced a major obstacle. Neither had a car or any money. Their plan was to take Michael's father's car and drive to Maryland, where they could ask Courtney's grandparents for financial assistance. Unfortunately, things did not go as planned. Michael stole his father's car, but while on the way to Maryland, they changed their minds and turned back home. This decision led to serious consequences for both Michael and Courtney. Michael's parents reported him to the police, and he was charged with car theft, resulting in a 70-day. Furthermore, Michael's parents insisted that he end his relationship with Courtney, believing it to be detrimental to him. This relationship was indeed harmful to both of them. Michael was forced to break up with Courtney, but he refused. As a result, his parents decided to kick him out of the house, leaving him homeless. He began sneaking into Courtney's apartment to sleep there, something he had done occasionally before, but now happened every night. Additionally, Michael dropped out of college, changed his address to Stevens, and put Stevens' phone number on his parole application without Stevens' involvement or permission. Although Michael had nowhere to live, he made no attempt to find a job, which left Courtney to pay all of her father's credit card bills. When Steven attempted to talk to his daughter about her mounting debt, an unforeseen tragedy struck first. On February 10, 2004, Elaine, Steven's new girlfriend, attempted to call him multiple times, but he didn't answer. Concerned that something might be wrong, she decided to go to his house. Between 2 o'clock and 4 p.m., she drove to his place and was surprised by what she saw. Michael, Courtney's boyfriend, was walking down the street with Steven's dog, wearing one of Steven's t-shirts. Feeling uneasy, Elaine got out of her car and approached the front door of Steven's house, where she found Courtney standing by the entrance. Elaine tried to enter, but the door was locked. She asked Courtney where her father was, but Courtney said she didn't know and left without opening the door, taking the key with her. Elaine saw that Steven's truck was still parked in its usual spot, which made her even more worried, so she decided to call the police. When the local police arrived, they quickly obtained a search warrant following Elaine's phone call. They entered the house through the back door and began their search, uncovering a horrific scene. Inside Steven's room, they found blood splatter on the walls. The most shocking discovery was Steven's body in a plastic trash can. He had a severed ear and a disfigured face. It was clear that the perpetrator didn't bother to hide their actions. Additionally, the police found several bank statements on the dining room table, many of them circled in pen. Meanwhile, Courtney was missing. Elaine learned of the altercation between Steven, his daughter, and her boyfriend, so the police quickly began a search. The police found Michael in the restroom of the mall across the street from Steven's house. As Elaine said, he was wearing one of Steven's t-shirts and had Steven's wallet, car keys, and credit cards in his possession. The police took Michael in for questioning. After leaving her father's apartment earlier that day, Courtney simply went to her mother's house, where her mother made her turn herself in. During questioning, Michael initially insisted that he knew nothing about the murder. Michael claimed that after being kicked out of the house, he had been living in Courtney's closet. One day, when Steven returned home, Courtney woke Michael up and told him that her father had found out he was staying with them. When he asked Courtney why, she said she would explain later and asked him to walk the dog, which he did. Michael ran to the mall because he was worried that Steven would find out he was near his home. However, after the police informed him of Steven's death, his story changed dramatically. He began to cry and said that after Steven tried to confront Courtney about the missing money on his credit card, she asked Michael to kill Steven and he agreed. His story shifts from being unaware of the death to saying he was asked to kill Steven. Courtney's interrogation was also unproductive. She gave two different statements. In her first interrogation, she blamed Michael entirely, claiming she had no knowledge of her father's death until he informed her. In a later confession, however, she revealed much more information to police. Courtney maintained that the murder was Michael's idea and admitted to helping him by removing Steven's dog from the room before the incident and placing the bat by the bedroom door. She said she heard everything while Michael killed her father. But by the end of the trial in September 2006, her story had changed dramatically. Courtney was convicted of murder. When asked if she had any final statements, she maintained her innocence throughout the trial but stated that she wanted to publicly acknowledge that Michael Morin did not kill her father. She took full responsibility and agreed to her sentence. This shocking admission took everyone in the courtroom by surprise. However, Courtney's stance changed less than a year later. At Michael's trial in April 2007, where he faced the death penalty if convicted, Courtney did not repeat her previous statement that she was solely responsible for the crime and that Michael had nothing to do with it. Ultimately, Michael Morin was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. In 2017, Courtney Schulhoff was sentenced to 40 years in prison. Although both men involved were punished, the exact details of the case remain unclear. It was confirmed that Stephen was killed with a baseball bat, but it is still unclear which of the two did the killing. Courtney did not confess to killing her father, but Michael did. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Christopher Sutton. On Sunday, August 22, 2004, the Sutton family experienced a devastating tragedy following Susan's 57th birthday celebration. The celebration included Susan, her husband John, their son Christopher, his girlfriend Juliet, and family friend Teddy Montoda. After the party, Susan and John went to bed in separate rooms at their home in the upscale Coral Gables neighborhood near Miami, Florida. One night, a tragic event occurred. Susan usually slept in a separate room because her husband, John, snored loudly. While they were sleeping, a car stopped about 4 blocks away from their house. A man dressed in black was approaching their house with the intention of killing Susan and John. The attacker was armed with a 9mm Glock pistol and broke into Susan's house. He first went to John's bedroom and shot him twice in the head. He then moved to the room where Susan was sleeping, shot her 6 times, and left. The police were notified of the incident. Police and ambulances were dispatched to the scene shortly afterwards. Unfortunately, doctors determined that Susan, 57, had died. John was still alive but had suffered serious injuries and had lost a lot of blood. He was taken to hospital, where paramedics worked frantically to save him, although his chances of survival were slim. Before being taken to hospital, John said that he could not see the shooter in the dark and did not know who it was. Forensic experts began examining the crime scene, while police questioned neighbors and searched for surveillance cameras. Although no cameras were found, but neighbors reported seeing a suspicious man dressed in dark clothing running away from the house. There were no signs of forced entry. The killer had accessed the home through the sliding glass doors. The house was intact, with no money or jewelry taken, indicating to police that this was not a robbery. The attack was clearly targeted at killing Susan and John. But the motive behind the murder remains unknown. Melissa Sutton was 18 years old when her parents were attacked. As a freshman living on her own, she couldn't attend the celebration at their house. She was devastated to learn about her mother's death. Overwhelmed with grief, she went to see her father in the hospital. She described him as looking very unwell. John had miraculously survived 2 gunshot wounds to the head, leaving doctors astonished that he was still alive, although he remained in serious condition. When John woke up in intensive care, he realized he was blind. Additionally, he was experiencing severe shock. He felt unsafe in the hospital, constantly fearing that the killer might return. This left John feeling endangered. He was eager to leave the hospital and find a safe place to hide. His fears were taken seriously, so a guard was assigned to his room, and police patrolled the area around the clock. Due to the severity of his injuries, John was also unable to hear anything. He didn't hear the shots fired at his wife and was unaware of what happened to Susan. As he slowly started to recover, he asked Melissa how his wife was. She did not answer because the police had advised her not to say anything that might upset John further. He later found out that his wife had been murdered by her attacker. The news was a huge shock to him. Susan's death was a huge loss for the whole family. She had devoted her life to being a loving mother. Susan spent many years as an intensive care nurse, a respected profession in the United States. Her career ended in the late 1970s when she decided to stay at home with her husband, John, after the birth of their first child, Christopher. They made this choice because Susan had been unable to conceive for 7 years, at which point they decided to adopt a daughter, Melissa. The police discovered that John had built a successful business and may have had enemies. They also learned that he had received previous threats of violence. The police investigated everyone who had had animosity toward John and Susan, but they all had solid alibis. While the police searched the crime scene for evidence, they discovered that Susan's purse, jewelry belonging to her or her husband, were still intact. Although these items were visible, the police planned to interview John, but he had difficulty communicating. However, he was able to provide some useful information. Although he could not identify the shooter, he recalled seeing a dark figure at the door. The attacker may have been dressed all in black or may have been African American. John could not be certain in the darkness. Unfortunately, this information was not useful to the police. The police decided to speak with Teddy, a family friend who was at the party before the shooting. They visited his house for an interview. Teddy explained that he was on the phone with Susan at the exact moment the shooting happened. He heard a gunshot, followed by silence. Feeling frightened, he called the police, got into his car, and rushed to the Susan family's home, arriving just after the police. Teddy was very shaken by the attack on Susan. However, the police found his account unusual. They questioned why he was still talking to Susan when everyone else had already left the party, leading them to suspect an affair. Teddy clarified that he was not just a family friend but also a business partner. He claimed that they were discussing an urgent business matter and that he frequently communicated with both John and Susan to handle various issues, so he didn't find his late conversation with Susan abnormal. During the conversation, Teddy told the police that the shooters were professional and trained shooters. The police found this information interesting and took Teddy's gun for testing. Teddy was also called into the station for a lie detector test. The police believed he was hiding something and continued to question him. Teddy eventually confessed that he was in a romantic relationship with Susan. The police have often seen love triangles that can lead people to commit terrible acts. However, Teddy's gun did not match the weapon used in the attack and his phone was tracked to a location far from the crime scene at the time of the shooting. Teddy denied any involvement in the attack on John and Susan. Although his lie detector test was deemed inconclusive, it was suggested that his anxiety stemmed from trying to keep his affair with Susan a secret to avoid damaging his relationship with his friend John. John had a strong and trusting relationship with Teddy. Shortly before the incident, John and Teddy received one of the largest payouts in their law firm's history, over $1 million, and they celebrated this occasion extravagantly. Teddy was ruled out as a suspect, and the police decided to investigate other family members instead. An examination revealed that John could not have physically inflicted the shot on himself, so he was not considered a suspect. Their daughter Melissa has a solid alibi because she was in another city and also passed a lie detector test. The police then investigated Christopher Sutton. He had a girlfriend named Juliet. They had attended a family party together. Christopher quickly claimed that he and Juliet had gone to the movies the night before and provided their tickets as evidence. Juliet confirmed his story. The police then requested the cinema's surveillance camera footage, confirming that they had indeed gone to the cinema that night and confirming their alibi. After leaving the hospital, John moved in with Christopher so he could care for him for a while. However, disturbing evidence was discovered that Christopher actually wanted to kill his parents. He even threatened to kill his mother during a fight. Christopher became the prime suspect in the case. Additionally, Christopher had a criminal record that included vandalizing a teacher's home. When Christopher was 16, his parents, John and Susan, decided to send him to a reform school. Christopher was aggressive and had trouble controlling his anger, which made it difficult for him to socialize with other teenagers. He changed schools at least 6 times. He often skipped school. John would drop him off at the main entrance, walk to the door, but then Christopher would sneak out through another exit and go do his own thing. However, his absences were not his biggest problem. He also got involved in some criminal activities. One day, he and a group of friends broke into a teacher's house, causing damage and graffiti. As a result, Christopher was arrested and the teacher filed a lawsuit against him. The damage was estimated to be in excess of $50,000, and his parents had to pay it. Christopher's family had no financial problems and could easily pay the fine. However, his family was frustrated with their son's out-of-control behavior and did not know how to handle him. Christopher was a difficult teenager who had no respect for adult authority. His rebellion began with his love of piercings and tattoos, which his parents strongly disapproved of. Despite their efforts, they were unable to change his behavior, which led to more problems. One day, Christopher pointed an unloaded rifle at his mother and sister, threatening to kill them. Shortly before Christopher's 16th birthday, Susan discovered a note in his room that outlined a plan to kill his parents to inherit their money. Susan informed John about the note, and they confronted Christopher, who dismissed it as a joke. However, when his parents saw the note, they became frightened. From that point on, they were afraid to be alone with their son in the house. They even sought legal help, which led to a court-ordered rehabilitation program. Staff from a specialist organization forcibly transferred Christopher to a rehabilitation facility on the island of Samoa called Paradise Bay. It is a strict school for troubled youth. In 1998, when Christopher first arrived at this institution, his behavior became extremely aggressive, leading to him being restrained. Following this, he was taken to a remote camp in the mountains, where he was left tied up. The staff aimed to re-educate him through these strict measures. Typically, such severe discipline was effective and helped even the most challenging cases to improve. After spending a year in a behavior correction facility, Christopher sent his parents an emotional video message. In it, he described the violence he experienced there and accused his parents of not loving him for sending him to such a place. Upon hearing this, his parents visited institutions for troubled teenagers in Samoa but found nothing wrong. As a result, they did not believe Christopher's claims. They knew about the strict rules in place and believed they were intended to benefit troubled teens. Furthermore, Christopher was there under a court order, so his parents could not take him away. However, Christopher still hoped to leave the facility when he turned 18. John then received a court order stating that Christopher would remain in custody. The program at Paradise Bay was extended for another year, which surprised Christopher. But he had no choice but to remain at the facility. In 2000, Paradise Bay was closed after management faced multiple allegations of youth mistreatment. Christopher finally returned home on his 19th birthday, after 30 months at Paradise Bay. This situation raised concerns for the police, as his anger at being mistreated could be considered a motive for murder. After enduring such torture, Christopher may have felt the urge to take revenge on his parents. However, after returning from Paradise Bay, he changed. Christopher always showed that he had become a caring and calm son, especially in how he took care of his father following an incident. John could not believe that his son could be involved in the case, believing that Christopher had changed. However, the police suspected that Christopher had orchestrated the double murder, which was only partially successful because his father survived. Although Christopher had an alibi, he may have hired someone else to carry out the crime. The police needed to gather evidence to support their suspicions. So they brought him in for a second interview. In this conversation, Christopher reveals details that have not been revealed to the public and remain confidential. Christopher said he went to the scene of the incident. He saw the shooter walking down the hallway, and his mother Susan had been shot 6 times, information that was later confirmed during the investigation. Christopher also recounted the order in which the shots were fired and other key details. While Christopher appears distraught and cries over his mother's death, the police believe he is lying and is actually a criminal. However, Christopher was supported by his girlfriend Juliet, who also seemed shocked by the incident. She said she herself had been in shock for a long time, following the news of the shooting. Juliet met Christopher when she was 17, and he was 19, having just returned from a school for troubled youth. She described him as kind, polite and courteous, and he made a strong positive impression on her. He treated her like a true gentleman. So she could never imagine that he could commit murder. Juliet said that his parents welcomed her into their family. His mother, Susan, taught her how to apply makeup and helped her develop her dressing style. His father, John, also supported her by giving her a job at his law firm. The couple's parents supported them financially without expecting anything in return. They were happy to see the couple together. When police first encountered Christopher at the crime scene, it was shortly after he had been informed of the incident. He appeared to be very upset, and one officer noticed tears on his face. However, his initial statement to police during questioning shattered the impression of sadness. He quickly explained that he and Juliet had had dinner with their parents but left at around 9 p.m. to go to the movies. He then gave the police their movie tickets. Instead of asking how his parents were doing, he focused on justifying his actions and emphasized his alibi before any charges were brought. Police carefully reviewed surveillance footage from the cinema, which showed Christopher leaving after the movie around midnight. They noticed he immediately used his mobile phone to make a call, arousing curiosity about who he was contacting. The police quickly checked all his calls. Police later determined that Christopher had contacted a man named Garrett Kopp 331 times in the days leading up to the murder, which raised suspicions. Garrett, a police officer with a criminal record, had come to the attention of police. They suspected he might be involved in the crime. The case drew attention to Garrett's troubled past, including multiple arrests, adding to police suspicions. Police began to consider Garrett as a potential suspect. At the time of the case, he was out on bail. When police examined the weapon used in the murder, they found it to be very similar to Garrett's Glock, so he was taken to the station for questioning. Garrett had a tense conversation with the police and later admitted to attacking John and Susan. However, Garrett insisted that he did not act on his own. He said that Christopher had threatened to kill him and his son if he did not comply. Garrett insisted that the idea for the attack was entirely Christopher's. He also said that Christopher had given him the gun and had left the door unlocked, allowing him easy access to the house. The police arrested Garrett and charged him with murder, but his testimony was not enough to keep Christopher in custody. Juliet was questioned by police who believed she had more information than she was revealing. Despite their efforts, she denied any involvement and insisted on her innocence for several hours. The interrogation lasted 13 hours in total, but the police did not record it. Later, Juliet alleged that police had threatened her with arrest to force a confession and acted provocatively during the questioning. However, she eventually admitted that Christopher felt a strong resentment towards his parents for placing him in a facility for troubled teenagers. Recently, his parents tried to push him to get a job and start covering his own costs, which he found unacceptable, and this led to family conflicts. During questioning, Juliet revealed that Christopher had been planning revenge on his parents for years. He often spoke about the inheritance and how they could live without worries if he could take everything his parents had earned. However, she didn't take his threats seriously. The police had gathered enough evidence to obtain an arrest warrant for Christopher Sutton. However, by that time, he had disappeared. This was a crucial moment for the police, as they feared that Christopher might return to harm John. Fortunately, the police were able to locate and arrest Christopher, charging him with the murder of his mother and attempted murder of his father. Garrett Kopp and Christopher Sutton were eventually tried separately, and both faced the death penalty. Christopher, however, maintained that he had no role in planning the crime. The defense argued that the police were unfair, claiming that the police pressured Juliet, which influenced her testimony. After Garrett learned that he could face the death penalty, Garrett decided to cooperate with the prosecution by pleading guilty to a lesser charge, which was in his favor. He was then sentenced to 30 years in prison. The prosecution's case took a turn when Juliet appeared in court to testify. She revealed that Christopher had often expressed anger at his parents for not giving him money, even saying that they deserved to die for their actions. The defense argued that much of Juliet's testimony was given under police pressure and should be excluded from the case. However, the judge denied this request. In court, Juliet maintained that she had been truthful during her interrogation with the police. She stated that she viewed Christopher's anger as mere frustration and never believed he would go on to commit such serious crimes. After Juliet's testimony, John, the surviving father, shared his thoughts. After hearing all the witness testimony, John believed that Christopher was capable of committing the crime. John noted that even after leaving the hospital, Christopher continued to try to manage the family's finances, which led him to believe that Christopher was involved in the crime. When it was Christopher's turn to speak, he accused Garrett of attacking their parents due to his drug addiction. Christopher highlighted several moments when Garrett was out of control due to drugs, claiming that during those times he was dangerous and capable of committing any crime. Christopher also mentioned that he kept drugs in Susan's bedroom closet. The Garrett might have entered the house to steal illegal drugs. However, the prosecutor argued that the scene did not appear to be a burglary, everything was intact, even the money and jewelry were intact. If it was a burglary, Garrett would have taken valuables. In his defense, Christopher claimed that he had changed and overcome the anger, resentment, and disappointment he felt towards his parents for sending him to a special school. He believed that he had changed for the better. After extensive deliberation, the jury found Christopher Sutton guilty of first-degree murder and attempted murder. Christopher was shocked by the verdict because he was sure that he would be acquitted. Christopher received 3 life sentences without the possibility of parole. Currently, survivor John Sutton is putting in great effort to regain his eyesight. He has formed a new relationship and started a family, and at 70 years old, he continues to practice law. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Justice Garrett. Justice Garrett, a teenage girl from Florida, USA, suddenly disappeared after school. As police investigated the case, they discovered the motive and the horrific events surrounding her disappearance. They were increasingly shocked by the brutality of the perpetrator, the most brutal in the history of the county. It had been just 3 weeks since Justice's 16th birthday. That day, she had overslept and woken up later than usual, causing her to miss the school bus. Her mother, Danielle, then 37, was busy getting her 5-year-old daughter ready for kindergarten and couldn't help Justice get to school. Danielle believed Justice could handle herself. Justice was going to return home by the school bus in the evening as usual. But she didn't return home at the scheduled time. Initially, Justice's family wasn't concerned because she had many friends and often stayed late with them after school. However, as time went on and she still hadn't returned, her mother and stepfather began to worry. They assumed she might be spending the night at her best friend's house. Since they needed to wake up early for work, they went to bed without waiting for her. But when morning came, Justice still hadn't returned home. Danielle grew impatient and worried about her daughter's whereabouts. Unable to reach Justice by phone, Danielle decided to contact the police for help. The police took the missing person report seriously and began an investigation. Police checked out places where Justice might have been, as they often see teens staying with friends before returning home. However, Justice's mother sensed something was wrong because Justice had not contacted family, which worried her. Police considered the possibility that Justice might have run away. Danielle said Justice often spent weekends with friends, and she often helped her mother take care of her younger sister and would not disappear without telling anyone. Justice always dealt with her problems instead of running away from them. And she always discussed any difficulties with her mother. Danielle was worried because all Justice's belongings were left at home. She believed something terrible might have happened to her daughter, so she insisted on starting the search right away. Despite the police's reassurances, Danielle's anxiety grew. Her daughter had never hung out with bad friends, and it was unusual for her to run away or avoid problems. Even when she was with friends, she would call her parents to let them know. However, she did not return any calls or texts. She was friendly and sociable, and did not use drugs or alcohol. It seemed completely impossible that she would just run away without telling anyone. Police checked Justice's database and confirmed her mother's story. She had no criminal record and there were no reports of her being in an accident. Police began searching for Justice by interviewing several teenagers, classmates, and acquaintances. Some said they had seen her sleeping in the cemetery, while others said she had moved in with a secret boyfriend. In fact, Justice had no boyfriend and had never been to the cemetery. None of these claims were true. Police interviewed everyone who knew Justice, including her teachers and classmates. They discovered that she had not been to school that morning. A review of surveillance footage along Justice's route and a check of her phone's geolocation showed that she left home around 7:25 a.m. to go to school, but she disappeared about 30 minutes later, on her way to school. What happened to Justice during that time? For days after she went missing, on April 17th, a man called the police. While out jogging, he noticed a strange, unpleasant odor coming from the edge of the trail, which piqued his curiosity and prompted him to head toward the woods. After walking a few meters, the man accidentally discovered a body. He then called 911. The police quickly arrived and discovered a female body that showed signs of severe decomposition. Although there was some minor damage caused by animals and the hot and humid weather. Most of the damage was caused by a chemical substance. Forensic experts determined that it was a type of bleach that had been poured on the victim's body, likely to cover up the evidence. The identity of the deceased could not be determined on the spot and laboratory analysis was required. However, the police suspected that this could be Justice, the person everyone was looking for. Police confirmed the identity of the body as Justice after DNA analysis. Her body was found in a wooded area near Delanda, about a 30-minute drive from her home in Sorrento. Her upper body was badly decomposed, exposing her bones. Her lower body was less damaged, suggesting that she had been exposed to fewer chemicals. Although the exact cause of Justice's death could not be determined due to the condition of her body, it appears that she died from strangulation. Evidence showed that her pants had been pulled down to her ankles and her sweater pulled up to her neck, suggesting that a sexual assault had taken place. Unfortunately, bleach destroyed much of the evidence, making it difficult to prove this motive. It was clear that she had suffered multiple blows to the face, as her nose was broken in several places. Police interviewed the jogger who discovered the body and reported it at 9:11 a.m. He provided important information about the incident. The jogger said that on the 16th, while running on the trail where the body was later discovered, he noticed another person in the distance. He believed it was a man based on his build, but he was unable to provide further details because the person ran away when he heard the jogger approaching. This unusual behavior caught the jogger's attention, but he did not go any closer to the area or see the body that day. However, he returned several days later when he noticed a foul odor. The investigation confirmed that the jogger was not involved in the incident. He passed a lie detector test and had an alibi for the day Justice went missing. To gather new information, police carefully reviewed surveillance camera footage along the entire route Justice took, especially at the bus stop where she was supposed to board. Justice's mother initially claimed that her daughter had walked to school by herself. However, police soon discovered that this was not true. In fact, her stepfather, Robert, had offered to drive Justice to school that morning. Police were suspicious of Danielle's lie about how her daughter got to school, so they approached her more cautiously. This time, she changed her story, admitting that Justice had not walked alone. Robert had driven her in his car. She explained that she had lied because Robert's driver's license had been suspended and she feared he would punish her if she told the police the truth. And that Danielle thought her little lie wouldn't get in the way of finding her daughter. Unfortunately, the deception in this case made it difficult for the investigation to piece together what really happened. The police requested the school surveillance camera footage, which covered the parking lot. This is the location where Robert was supposed will drop her down. However, the camera was malfunctioning at the time and no footage was recorded. Therefore, it was impossible to confirm whether Robert dropped Justice off or not. However, multiple witnesses reported that Justice did not come to school and that no one had seen her that day. The only person confirmed to have seen Justice alive was Robert, and only he knew what really happened. The police brought Robert in for questioning. Eventually, he began to talk. On the day of the incident, Robert claimed that he never took Justice to school. Instead, he drove her to a nearby town at her request and dropped her off at the entrance of the town so she could meet a male friend. Robert suspected that this friend might be her secret boyfriend, whom she was dating without her mother's permission. In order to build a better relationship with Justice and gain her trust, Robert decided to comply with her request. However, Robert did not know the name or any details about the friend Justice was meeting. Justice then assured Robert that she could get to school by herself and planned to return by bus, so he felt that everything was fine. He could not wait for her because he had to go to work in the Volos district, and he did not have much time. Unfortunately, Danielle and Robert were unable to provide any useful information. The police then turned to Justice's friends, who all confirmed that she had recently started talking about a guy she met online. He had shown a lot of interest in her and texted her frequently, which she shared with her friends. However, Justice felt uncomfortable with his excessive attention and her friends believed that Justice would not date him. The police examined the Justice's social media accounts, looking closely at her likes, comments, recent subscriptions, and conversations. They discovered one account that had been in frequent contact with Justice over the past few months and showed various activities related to her. This account belonged to an 18-year-old man, whose profile picture featured a muscular young man. He had been flirting with Justice, expressing interest in getting to know her, and complimenting her. Despite mentioning that he lived nearby, police were unable to find anyone who looked like him, and none of her friends recognized him. Justice did not respond to his persistent messages, choosing instead to ignore him. However, police believe the social media account is crucial to solving the case. Police then conducted a thorough search of his social media accounts. They discovered a phone number associated with his account, but instead of belonging to an 18-year-old, it was registered to a middle-aged man named Robert Kern, Justice's stepfather. This revelation shocked the police. When they approached Robert again, he, who had initially been cooperative, suddenly changed his attitude and refused to communicate. The police were determined to find answers, especially since Robert had lied, and now all the evidence pointed to him as the prime suspect in Justice's murder. Despite his protests, police arrested Robert Kern. However, social media interactions are not sufficient grounds to charge someone with murder. At the time, Robert was very close to the family, as he had been dating Justice's mother since the previous fall. He often stayed overnight at their home and kept in close contact with the entire family. There was no evidence of inappropriate behavior toward Justice. Robert denied any wrongdoing and dismissed the idea that he had harassed Justice. He suggested that his frequent compliments were meant to encourage Justice, arguing that receiving attention from a man could be a compliment. However, this explanation seems implausible, as Justice ignored his messages and she thought he was weird for discussing him with her friends. The police, looking for evidence against Robert, decided to interview Justice's close friend, Rachel. Rachel explained that their friendship had recently become close, as Justice often stayed overnight at her house. Rachel mentioned that a few months before the tragedy, Justice had stayed so often that it aroused suspicion. It seemed that Justice was trying to avoid going home. Robert had also been staying at Danielle's house quite often in recent months. Could his presence have contributed to Justice's reluctance to go home? Rachel reported that Justice had spent nearly a month at her house in the weeks before her death. She observed that Justice had become increasingly anxious. Previously calm, she now flinched at any accidental touch and implied that she was afraid of Robert, her stepfather. Rachel recalled seeing Robert on the day Justice disappeared. She described him as looking very uneasy, to the point where she actually felt scared. This made her understand why Justice liked to stay at her house every night. Police decided to take a closer look at Robert's background, focusing on his social media interactions and cell phone calls. What they discovered was disturbing. Robert had a significant criminal record, including 2 burglaries dating back to the early 2000s. Recent search history showed that he had looked up drugs that could cause unconsciousness, such as chloroform, and that he had purchased the drug. He also spent a lot of time studying maps, especially the nearby woods, likely in search of a suitable place to hide a body. He also researched methods for disposing of evidence. After learning that bleach had been used on Justice's body, police ran a geolocation check on Robert's cell phone on the day Justice went missing. They discovered that he had not been driving and had not dropped Justice off at a bus stop or school. Instead, Robert went into a wooded area where Justice's body was later discovered. Police reported that Robert's cell phone was not working for about an hour during this time. Initially, Robert claimed that he was on his way to work, but this was false. In fact, he took Justice into the woods, where he attacked, raped, and killed her. Justice was later charged with murder and was held in custody until his trial began. The exact motive behind the crime was never revealed, as Robert did not reveal it until the very end of the trial. The prosecution argued that the crime was murder with the intent to commit rape. Robert chose not to testify in his own defense during the trial, but he never admitted to any wrongdoing. However, the prosecutor's office had enough evidence to charge him with murder. Robert's troubled criminal history was presented during the trial. He was first arrested in May 2019 in New York State on fraud charges and was held in the county jail. It was mentioned that in 1999, he had committed burglary and breaking and entering, which resulted in an 18-month prison sentence. 3 years later, he was arrested again for burglary and served a year in prison. The prosecution later proved that Robert's testimony was completely false. He mentioned that he dropped Justice off near the school early in the morning and that he worked as a carpenter. However, both of these statements were proven to be lies. After being caught lying, Robert tried to create more excuses. But they were all designed to fool the police. They were able to accurately track the movements of both Robert and Justice. They compared the timestamps on Robert's cell phone and the searches on his phone, which showed that he had been planning the crime for a long time. The prosecution argued that Justice had no chance of surviving from the beginning because Robert had intended to kill her. Vegetation from where Justice's body was found in Robert's car, although he claimed he had never been in the area. However, he had in fact been there at least twice after the murder. He returned to the location on April 16th to pour a chemical on the body to destroy evidence of the crime. At that time, he was spotted by a jogger. The prosecutor's office attempted to prove that Robert's actions were sexually motivated, arguing that he had intentionally kidnapped Justice in order to rape and harm her. Robert had been keeping tabs on Justice for a long time, and she tried her best to avoid him, so she was rarely home. Danielle, Justice's mother, was devastated by her daughter's murder. In her testimony, she said that Robert had discouraged her from calling the police immediately after Justice's disappearance, convincing her that Justice was just staying at a friend's house. He also pressured her to lie, claiming that Justice had gone to school by himself. At first, the Danielle did not understand why he made such demands, thinking that he was afraid of the consequences of driving without a license. After reviewing the case documents, the jury reached its decision in just 30 minutes. They found Robert Kern guilty of first-degree murder of Justice Garrett. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 5 years for attempting to obstruct the investigation. Throughout the trial, he never admitted his guilt and showed no remorse for his actions. Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, he maintained his innocence until the very end. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Larry Holman. A small town, Festus, Missouri, USA, with a population of about 10,000, is a religious community. Almost all the local residents are people of faith, very calm and friendly people. It is a quiet place where everyone knows each other very well and keeps in touch. However, sometimes it is in such quiet towns that serious crimes occur. On November 21, 2000, the local police department received a call from a witness. She reported hearing gunshots near a factory and saw a suspicious vehicle, but she was too afraid to approach it. She believed that the man in the vehicle was injured. The police quickly went to the reported location. A few hundred meters away, they spotted a pickup truck in a field. From a distance, it looked like the truck had a problem because the hazard lights were flashing. As the officers got closer, they noticed the windshield was broken and a man slumped over the wheel. He showed no signs of life, and his foot was still on the brake pedal. On the floor, there was an unfinished soda can, which likely fell out of the man's hand after he was murdered. There was a large hole in his skull from a bullet that had penetrated and even broken the windshield. It appeared that the murder had occurred just minutes earlier, as the blood was still fresh and running down the floor of the truck. The officers quickly checked and found the victim's face was severely disfigured. Police officer Randy, who arrived at the scene of the crime. Randy said he had worked with the victim before, and the victim was Larry Holman. He also knew Larry's wife Tammy and their 2 children. When Randy called, he did not tell Tammy that her husband was dead, so she initially thought Larry was just injured and had come to the scene. When she realized he was dead, she collapsed with grief and began to cry. Larry and Tammy met at church. Although she was much younger, Larry fell deeply in love with her and pursued her. At the time, Tammy was 16 years old, and Larry was 28. He was divorced and had a daughter from a previous marriage. After Tammy graduated from college, their romantic relationship began. Friends and family described their relationship as genuine and loving. Larry's co-workers noted that he even kept a picture of his wife in his lunchbox so he could see her whenever he took a break from work. They married and had 2 children, Josh and Natalie, and their family was very religious. Larry was known to be a kind person. He had no criminal record or connections to the criminal world, making it unclear who might want to harm him. An analysis of the car was conducted, and the bullet's trajectory was reconstructed. It was determined that the shot was fired from a significant distance using a powerful cartridge. The bullet entered through the rear side window, traveled diagonally through the headrest, and struck Larry in the back of the head. After sustaining the head injury, Larry's leg remained on the brake pedal, causing the car to stop. Severe injuries cause immediate death. It was assumed that an unfortunate hunter had done it by accident. However, further investigation revealed that the shot did not come from the woods, raising questions about the vehicle's movement. Although the braking distance was determined, it was unclear whether Larry stopped before or after he was injured. Additionally, the first officers on the scene noted that the car's headlights were off, suggesting that the vehicle could not have been moving when the injury occurred. They later confirmed that Larry may have parked near the factory, and the murder was intentional. Officer Randy believed that Larry was the target of a planned attack, but the other officers were not supportive of the idea because the area was safe and had never had a similar incident before. In fact, there had been no murders in decades, making it hard to believe that anyone would harm a good man like Larry. The investigation began by interviewing everyone who knew the Larrys, starting with neighbors and relatives. The neighbor who lived across the street from Larry said he had seen Larry at church just before the murders, and that they had both attended church services. The neighbor had heard that Larry was going through a hard time and had quit his job. The neighbor noticed that Larry seemed nervous, but Larry brushed off any concerns with jokes. The neighbor reported an incident when he and Larry were hunting in the woods. At some point, Larry and the neighbor became separated in the woods. Moments later, Larry called his neighbor and reported that he was injured and gave his coordinates. The neighbor quickly ran to help him. As he walked through the woods, he noticed a stranger wearing camouflage walking in the opposite direction. In Missouri, hunters are required to wear camouflage when hunting with a firearm, so this did not seem unusual. When the neighbor found Larry, he discovered that Larry was okay, as the bullet only grazed his head by a few inches. The neighbor concluded that the hunter was inexperienced and did not know how to use a gun properly. Larry later said he did not see the shooter, suggesting that the shooting may have been accidental. There were many people out hunting at the time. It is not uncommon for a hunter to mistakenly identify another person as prey, resulting in injury or even death each year. However, Randy believes the shooting was not an accident. Unfortunately, Larry's neighbor was unable to provide a detailed description of the hunter he encountered. Police then interviewed the woman, named Helen, who called the police to report the incident. Police spoke to her to see if she had noticed anything unusual on the day of the murder. According to Helene, just before she called the police, a car had pulled up near her house. A man got out, dressed in camouflage, pulled out a large shotgun, and walked along the railroad tracks toward the woods. He did not cross the tracks, however, which was odd, since hunters usually walk straight into the woods. Helen said that she had no idea what had happened afterward. Police investigated Larry's background in the hope of finding clues to the killer. However, they discovered that he was a calm man with no criminal record and a devoted husband. He had worked at the factory for many years, but had recently decided to quit and was looking for work. Everyone who knew Larry described him as a good person who would never be involved in any crime. The community was small and tight-knit, which added to their concerns. The motive behind the crime is unclear, leaving locals fearing that a madman may have committed the crime and is on the loose. Public pressure mounted on the police to quickly apprehend the suspect. Meanwhile, rumors began to spread throughout the city. Many of the rumors cast a negative light on Larry's wife, Tammy. They said she was too young for Larry. They pointed out that she wore revealing clothes behind her husband's back and frequently visited nightclubs and bars while he was at work. Strange cars were also seen near her home at night. However, there were reports that Tammy spent time with her children and seemed to be a good wife. But rumors began to spread that she was cheating on her husband and that her lovers were visiting her frequently. Therefore, all the young people who visited Tammy while Larry was away became suspects. If she was indeed unfaithful, any of her lovers could have had a motive for the attack. A neighbor gave the police important information. She said that her children were playing with Tammy's children. A few days after Larry's death, when she went to pick up the children, she noticed a strange man in the house. He acted as if he were the host. The neighbor found the man's behavior very unusual, especially since Larry had just passed away. When the neighbor questioned, Tammy explained that the man was just an old school friend who wanted to support her during this difficult time. This attracted the attention of the police, and they decided to identify him. The police discovered that the man was Tim Smith. The police discovered that Tim had moved in with Tammy the day after Larry died. He quickly took over Larry's space and used his belongings without hesitation. It was clear that Larry's children were unhappy with the situation and did not like having strangers in their home. The police decided to look into Tim's criminal history, suspecting that he might have had a motive for committing the crime. Surprisingly, the police did not find any serious issues on his record. The most serious offenses on his record were a few traffic violations. Tim and Tammy were high school classmates and dated for a while, but they broke up after graduation. However, it seemed unusual that Tim would quickly go from former classmates to roommates living in Tammy's house. Tim was then brought to the police station for questioning. At the police station, Tim denied any involvement in Larry's death, but claimed that he had moved in with Tammy shortly after her husband's death. He claimed that before that, he had only visited occasionally and slept over a few times. At the beginning of the questioning, he claimed to be Tammy's boyfriend. Furthermore, he admitted that he had been her lover for a long time. Tammy had never been faithful to Larry and had had several affairs. She had planned to leave her husband to marry Tim. Witnesses reported that Tammy acted strangely after Larry died. At the funeral, she wore a revealing outfit and seemed nonchalant throughout the funeral. She seemed cheerful and spent a lot of time on the phone. One of Larry's sisters heard that during these calls, Tammy was talking to other men. Rumors began to spread that Tammy was not only having affairs with Tim Smith, but with many others. A witness reported that Tammy was sunbathing in a revealing bikini in front of her house. He stopped to say hello and compliment her, leading to a relationship. But he was much younger than Tammy, and their relationship quickly ended. However, police investigated and found a third man, Charlie Miller, who was often mentioned. According to Larry's eldest son from his first marriage, Charlie worked at a nearby grocery store. After dropping her daughter and son off at school, Tammy would go to the park to meet Charlie, where they spent many hours together. Several of Charlie's friends confirmed that Charlie had a romantic relationship with Tammy. They first met when Charlie worked as a contractor for Larry. Charlie was married at the time and had a close friendship with Larry. While working on renovations at Larry's house, Charlie met Tammy, who was very flirtatious. Their teasing soon turned into a more intimate relationship while Larry was away. Tammy eventually told her husband about the affair. However, he chose not to divorce her and instead tried to save their marriage. He asked Charlie to end his relationship with Tammy. The number of suspects continued to grow. Even if Tammy did not directly kill her husband, she could still be considered the mastermind of the crime. She had been having affairs with multiple people, and each had a motive for the murder. Police discovered text messages on Tammy's phone that showed she was having affairs with Tim Smith and Charlie Miller at the same time. To investigate further, police questioned Tammy. She revealed that shortly before Larry died, Tom Rumble had started stalking her. She provided evidence through messages he sent her on a messaging app. She described him as a dangerous man. Just before Larry died, Tom began writing letters to Tammy. He expressed his love for her, his desire to have children, and his willingness to marry her. However, Tammy felt uncomfortable and tried to distance herself from him because of his obsessive behavior. She suspected that he might be involved in her husband's murder. Tammy provided the police with evidence of their correspondence. Even though her husband had died and she was in a relationship with Tim Smith, Tom's harassment continued. Tammy felt trapped and didn't know how to get Tom to stop. By the time the police were notified, Tom was still sending Tammy letters that she wasn't responding to. In fact, she had sought a restraining order against him in court. When the police spoke to Tom, he claimed to have genuine feelings for Tammy, but dismissed her request for a restraining order as an overreaction. He didn't consider himself a threat. He said that he had only come to give her a bouquet of flowers that day and did not want to scare Tammy. However, his behavior was quite suspicious, and he accidentally revealed that he had been to Larry's house many times, as he knew the layout of the house very well. This suggested that he had visited Tammy while her husband was away. After the autopsy, the medical examiner confirmed that Larry had been killed with a large caliber gun, specifically a .243 caliber rifle, which is the standard deer hunting rifle, and a correspondingly weighted bullet was used. As police continued their investigation, they discovered that shortly before the murder, Charlie, who was working as a contractor at the time, had talked to Larry about hunting. During a subsequent visit, Charlie showed Larry his .243 caliber rifle. Police specifically noted that Larry was killed with a .243 caliber rifle, which was associated with Charlie Miller. Additionally, an anonymous informant told police that Tammy's boyfriend owned a .243 caliber rifle. Charlie's gun was taken for testing. Fortunately, the police found a bullet near Larry's car that matched the gun. In Larry's death, a love triangle was involved. The police learned that Charlie and Larry had been close friends for a long time. Police suspected Charlie of the murder because he owned a car that matched the description of a woman who lived near the railroad tracks. Although she did not speak directly to the driver, she saw him clearly. When shown a photo, she was able to identify Charlie. After examining Charlie's weapon, the police confirmed that Larry had been killed with Charlie's rifle. On January 9, 2001, the police went to Charlie's house to arrest him and inform him of his rights. Charlie later confessed to killing Larry. He was arrested and taken to the police station. Tim Smith and Tom Rumble were cleared of any involvement in the murder. After his arrest, he testified that he drove to the house where Tammy lived near the railroad tracks, got his rifle and wore camouflage that day. He then walked along the tracks, retracing the route he had taken through the woods and fields that morning. The only question that remains is how did he know where Larry would be at that time? Charlie confessed that Tammy had been urging him to take action. She expressed her suffering due to her husband's cruelty, and Charlie felt compelled to rescue her from this oppressive situation. This was not the first time Charlie had targeted Larry. During a hunting trip in the forest, he had previously fired a shot that narrowly missed Larry's head. It was evident that this was intentional, as Tammy had informed Charlie about her husband's whereabouts, making it easy for him to find Larry in the woods. After this initial attempt, Tammy spoke with Charlie, who tried to convince her to leave Larry and be with him instead. Despite this conversation, she continued to provoke Charlie, believing that a second attempt on Larry's life would succeed, especially with Larry's upcoming marriage putting pressure on Charlie, who was also a close friend of Larry. Why didn't Tammy divorce her husband if she wasn't happy in her marriage? The answer is simple. She and Charlie didn't want a divorce because they wanted to avoid dividing assets and child custody. Additionally, they were motivated by the prospect of benefiting from Larry's life insurance policy. Just before these events, Larry had purchased $1 million insurance policy. Tammy saw this as a great opportunity, but then she found out that it wasn't a life insurance policy, but an employer protection policy. Therefore, Tammy could only claim $150,000. Now that Tammy is under interrogation, she firmly maintains that she did not kill her husband and had nothing to do with his death. She begins to blame Charlie for everything, believing that her lover had developed strong feelings for her due to their brief relationship. She believes that Charlie sees Larry as the only obstacle to their happiness, so he decides to get rid of Larry. Charlie had a clear motive for the murder. During his trial, Charlie Miller, 49, pleaded guilty again to the murder. He argued that he was in emotional distress and was on medication at the time of the crime, which affected his understanding of his actions. As part of a plea agreement, Charlie was sentenced to 25 years in prison and is scheduled to be released in 2028. Throughout the trial, Tammy denied any involvement in the crimes. Her attorney continued to support her testimony. The prosecutor's office presented evidence, including numerous phone calls and text messages involving Charlie. Based on this evidence, it was shown that Tammy was a deceitful and cunning criminal who manipulated multiple men at once. The prosecution presented indirect evidence of her involvement through various telephone conversations that took place on the day of the murder. She was in frequent contact with Charlie, who also implicating her while discussing the execution of the order. However, the prosecutor's chances of winning at trial were uncertain. As a result, the prosecution proposed a deal to Tammy. 30-year-old Tammy Holman was sentenced to 7 years in prison, but she maintained her innocence, claiming that her confession was coerced. In 2009, she was released and returned to Festus. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of James Patrick Bulger. John Venables was born on 13 August 1982 in Kirby, a town in the northeast of England, 10 kilometers from Liverpool. He has 2 older brothers. His parents often separated and reconciled, and his mother often shouted at him. At school, John was bullied, which led to him transferring to another school. At his new school, John befriended a boy named Robert Thompson. Robert was born on August 23, 1982, and came from a troubled family in Kirby. His father left when he was only 2 years old, leaving his mother to care for 7 children on her own. Afterward, she had another child with a new partner, but the departure of her husband deeply affected her. As a result, she struggled with depression and turned to heavy drinking. Robert often argued with his brothers, but had a special bond with his younger brother Ryan. Robert had a keen interest in collecting toy trolls. As John and Robert became friends, they discovered that they had similar interests. They often spent time together skipping school and shoplifting. On the morning of February 12, 1993, they met on the street. Instead of going to school, they hid their backpacks and went to the Trend Mall, which was known as one of the most dangerous areas in the city. That day, John and Robert stole batteries, construction paint, and a toy demon from the mall. As they talked, they came up with a disturbing idea. They said, "Let's find a child." It's unclear who first suggested it, but once they agreed, they followed through with the plan. Almost 3 years ago, on March 16, 1990, James Patrick Bulger was born. He was the only child of Denise Bulger and Ralph Stephen Bulger. They had lost a child during pregnancy in their 20s, so when James was born, they took great care of him. He was a smiling baby, and Denise made sure he was never far from her. On Friday, February 12, 1993, it was just over a month before James's 3rd birthday. Denise's brother, Nicole, invited her to the mall that day, and Denise agreed, taking James with her. They arrived at the mall that afternoon. First, they waited outside a clothing store while Denise tried on some clothes. For a brief moment, she lost sight of James, and when she quickly searched for him, she found him alone and crying. After leaving the clothing store, they went to the butcher's shop. Along the way, they stopped frequently because James wanted to play. At one store, James made a mess in the children's clothing section, and at another, he took some candy. When they arrived at the butcher shop, Denise thought it would be okay to leave James outside for a while. She believed that buying meat would be quick, and that he was tired from walking with her. However, buying meat took longer than she expected. When Denise finally got outside, she realized that she had lost track of her son again. She had just seen James playing with a cigarette butt, but then he disappeared from sight. This time, there was no crying to help her locate James. Meanwhile, while Denise was inside, Robert and John were wandering around the mall, looking for a child to kidnap. Their motive for doing so remains unknown. John and Robert then noticed little James, wearing a blue jacket and eating caramels by himself in front of the butcher shop. John walked up to James and said, "Come on, honey." James responded and walked over. John then took the boy's hand. Occasionally, James would run ahead of the boys, but they kept close to him the entire time. The three then left the mall. This happened at 3:42 p.m., just before Denise came out of the store and realized her son was missing. Denise quickly began searching for James in the security office, describing the boy and calling his name over the loudspeaker, but there was no response. A missing persons report was filed with the police only after they had checked all the stores in the mall. Meanwhile, the three children were walking near the mall. The Liverpool Canal runs alongside the mall, and the boys wandered along the banks of the canal, reaching a deserted area. There, John and Robert joked about pushing James into the water. They tried to bring the boy closer to the water's edge so he would slip, but James didn't fall. John then picked James up and threw him to the ground, causing him to hit his head on the ground and injure. The ground was covered in blood, and the two boys, Robert and John, decided to run away, leaving James behind. Just then, a woman passed by, saw James, and assumed he was with the older children. Worried that James or his injuries might reveal what had happened, Robert and John turned back to the boy. They called out to him again, and to their surprise, James got up and followed them. As they moved toward a busier street, several people saw the three boys, and some noticed the wound on James's forehead, but no one intervened. Their journey was long, stretching over 1.5 miles, and little James was exhausted. He cried and protested, but the kidnappers continued to drag him along. To keep him moving, they even fed him excessively. Along the way, James screamed for his mother repeatedly and attempted to escape, almost reaching a busy street, but the boys stopped him. Several passers-by noticed the situation and asked why the children were without their parents, but no one took action. Eventually, they arrived in a deserted area where Robert and John took turns carrying James up a hill before deciding to rest on some steps. An elderly woman, seeing James was red from crying and bruises, approached them and asked what was happening. The boys claimed they didn't know and said they had found him on the hill. Mistaking their intentions, the woman directed them to the nearest police station. However, the boys chose to head in the opposite direction. They had gone about 2 miles when they stopped at a store. Two women approached John and Robert and discovered that James was the child who had gotten lost at the Strengths Mall. One of the women asked James if he was okay, but he remained silent. When she offered to take them to the police station, John confidently said that he knew the way, so they continued walking. They visited several stores and stopped to watch a fire along the way. Along the way, they encountered some children who asked about James. Robert told them that James was his brother, and they continued on. They walked along the railway tracks for at least 4 kilometers. Around 5:30 p.m., they reached a street in the city and played with James for a while. Although they were near the police station and Robert's house, they returned to the railway tracks. John and Robert's behavior changed. First, they tore off James's hood and threw it into the bushes. Then, they forced him to crawl through a hole in the fence onto the tracks. They poured stolen green paint on James, causing him to scream when the paint got into his left eye. John and Robert used everything around them to injure James, chasing him and throwing rocks and bricks at him, even hitting him on the head with a steel bar. They took off James's shoes, pants, and underwear, and they physically abused James. After torturing James, John and Robert placed James on the train tracks and covered him with bricks before leaving. James was bleeding and had multiple injuries all over his body. When the train arrived, he was dead. John and Robert then went to a video store before returning home, where John's mother Susan saw them through the window. After being reported missing by James's family, police began investigating the case and reviewed security footage from Strength Mall. The footage showed two older children taking James away, which surprised police, who had assumed the kidnappers were adults. It was confirmed that the suspects were around 12 years old. The following morning, the security footage was shared with the media. James's mother, Denise, spoke to the press alongside her husband Ralph, expressing her anguish over her son's situation and pleading for his safe return home. The investigation into the disappearance lasted 2 days, during which time several tips were received. On Saturday, February 13, a search of the water company turned up nothing. On Sunday afternoon, a railway worker discovered what he thought was a doll on the tracks. However, he was unaware of James's disappearance at the time, so he did not pay much attention to it. Later that day, 4 children discovered James's body. At first, they mistook it for a cat and then a doll torn in half, but they soon realized it was a human body. Police went to the railway to inspect the reported area. Half of James's body was covered with a coat. It appeared that James had been placed there. The boy's body was half off the tracks and half directly on the tracks. 42 injuries were found on James, mainly on his face and head. The boy suffered multiple fractures, and his body also had numerous cuts and bruises. An investigation revealed that James had lost a significant amount of blood. A shoe-like mark was found, and several wounds below the waist suggested that James had been sexually assaulted. It was determined that James had died when the train passed by, as the extent of his injuries made it impossible to determine a specific cause of death. James's underwear was covered in blood. Nearby, police discovered a 60-centimeter-long iron bar, along with several stones and bricks. In addition, 3 AA batteries and a can of blue paint were found near the body. Many neighbors from the Merseyside area came to the railway to pay their respects to the boy. Among them was Robert Thompson, who left a rose for James. John, on the other hand, did not come but was very interested in the story of James. One day, John told his mother, "If I see those boys, I will kick them in the head." John's parents did not suspect John, although they saw some blue paint on his sleeves, and he was wearing the same jacket seen in the surveillance camera footage. The community became confused. Some parents even began to worry about their children. Police reviewed school absentee lists and interviewed 60 children. A 12-year-old student was arrested, although he had not been charged with any crime. In response, neighbors vandalized his home by smashing windows. Police realized they were looking for older children than the actual suspects when they reviewed new footage from a parking lot camera. The video showed 2 boys walking with a baby, suggesting the kidnappers were likely under the age of 12. On the 4th day after the incident, a police officer from a nearby station contacted police. She reported that during a family gathering on Friday night, she noticed a dirty boy with paint on his clothes who had skipped school that day with a friend. The boy was identified as John Venables, aged approximately 10. Police then contacted John's school principal, who confirmed that John and his friend Robert had not attended school that day. 4 police officers arrived at Robert's house. When Robert saw the police, he began to cry. They had a search warrant and took some of his clothes. The officers immediately noticed blood on his shoes. Robert Thompson was arrested and taken to the police station for questioning. His mother was shocked when the police came to their house at 8 a.m. She even pointed out that there were traces of blue paint on her son's coat. When the police arrived at John's house, he, crying, said, "I didn't kill James." John was then taken into custody. At first, the police did not suspect either boy. They found it hard to believe that two children could commit such a crime. The two boys were taken into custody separately, and the police took fingerprints and blood samples from John and Robert's hair and fingernails. Police visited a store in the Strength Shopping Center after the owner reported seeing two boys standing in front of the window and touching items on Friday. Fingerprints belonging to Robert Thompson and John Venables were found on the glass. That same evening, Robert was questioned in the presence of his mother and lawyer. He was asked if he understood the difference between truth and lies, to which he responded that he did. When it was confirmed that he was at the shopping center, he attempted to deflect suspicion by saying he saw James that day, but claimed he was with someone else. John, who was familiar with Robert, denied any involvement in the kidnapping. Police noted that while Robert tried to shift blame onto John, he also denied his own involvement, stating he was with John but was not present during James's abduction. Robert pretended to cry when the police detected him lying, but the tears weren't real. The story began to unravel gradually. Initially, Robert stated that he saw John take the baby by the hand. However, the next morning, he admitted he had gone to the railroad with them. When the police brought up the stolen batteries, Robert felt ashamed. His mother encouraged him to be honest, and he confessed that he witnessed James being attacked with a brick. He insisted that he didn't participate in the violence. John was the only one responsible. Robert did acknowledge that he placed a brick on James's face while he was lying on the railway, supposedly to stop the bleeding, when the police questioned John. The questioning was difficult and had to be stopped frequently because John became very angry. John accused Robert of being a bad influence. At first, he denied being at the mall with Robert, but when he learned that Robert had confessed to being there, he admitted it. John struggled to keep his lie for a long time. Finally, after being repeatedly interrogated, he confessed that he had not only been at the mall, but had also killed James, but John claimed that he had been influenced by Robert. John recounted the events, starting with a walk around town and ending at the railroad. According to John, it was Robert who picked up James and threw him to the ground near the riverbank. John also claimed that Robert was responsible for the most horrific actions at the railroad. John was very cautious when the police brought up the batteries. He claimed to have no knowledge of Robert's involvement with the batteries. After a brief interrogation, John began to hit his father, who was sitting next to him, shocking the police. They now had enough evidence to charge John and Robert with the kidnapping and murder of James Bulger. Charges were filed on Saturday, February 20. James Bulger's funeral took place on March 1, 1993 in Kirby, with hundreds of people in attendance. During the investigation and trial, John and Robert denied all charges related to the case. The trial began in mid-May, and they were arraigned in adult court on November 1. Protests broke out outside the courthouse, leading to clashes with police. The murder of James Patrick Bulger by John Venables and Robert Thompson has caused outrage in the community. Evidence includes surveillance footage, paint and bloodstains on the two boys' clothing. A total of 38 witnesses have confirmed seeing the three children together on February 12. Many of these witnesses have been charged, as they lived in the area and did not intervene. Many believe they should have acted at the time to rescue James. Psychological evaluations of John and Robert have shown no mental disorders that would classify them as insane. John has unusual memories, including fantasies of rescuing James and returning him to his mother. Robert's psychiatrist has diagnosed him with symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. The prosecution insisted that both boys understood the seriousness of their actions, although the defense claimed that they had no previous history of violence. On 24 November, the verdict was announced in front of Dennis Bulger. John Venables and Robert Thompson were found guilty. Robert remained silent while John wept as the verdict was read. They were sentenced to indefinite detention and held in separate facilities under false identities. The case remains controversial. In 1999, the European Court of Human Rights ruled that John and Robert's right to a fair trial was not protected, as the trial took place in an adult court. In 2001, after 8 years in prison, they were given suspended sentences and released early, also under false identities. Robert Thompson has lived a relatively peaceful life since his release, while John, who is in Nablus, has chosen a more dangerous path. In 2010, John was incarcerated for child abuse and violating his parole. After the death of her son, Denise remarried and had 3 children. Ralph Bulger also remarried and had 3 daughters with his new wife. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Estibaliz Carranza. Estibaliz was born in September 1978 in Guadalajara, Mexico. Her father is Armando, a psychologist, journalist, and author of books on esotericism. Her mother is Angela, Spanish. In 1983, at the age of 5, Estibaliz left Mexico with his parents and younger brother, settled in Barcelona, Spain. Estibaliz had a fairly normal childhood, although her father, Armando, was very strict and not easygoing. Her father's anger made her think of ways to get rid of him. Despite this, he let her study at prestigious schools, and later supported her studies at the Autonomous University of Barcelona. As she grew up, she became sociable and had many friends. However, she also suffered from frequent mood swings and anger, during which she could become quite aggressive. As an adult, Estibaliz moved to Germany and lived in Munich for a while. She used her connections to find work, and she landed a job at an ice cream parlor in the nearby city of Nuremberg. She spoke German fluently, which helped her settle in easily, and her friendly demeanor made it easy for her to connect with the locals. While working at the ice cream parlor, she met her first husband, Holger Holtz, who sold refrigerators and was part of the Krishna religious community. He was 14 years older than she, and a few weeks after they met, he proposed to her because he was passionately in love with her. They soon married and moved to Berlin. Estibaliz found various jobs, but her life was not fulfilling. Right after the wedding, she and her husband Holger had a conflict. Despite his successful career, but he began to insult and physically abuse her. Nevertheless, they continued their married life, and in 2000, they relocated to Vienna, Austria. In Vienna, they had the opportunity to start their own business, opening the ice cream parlor Schlee Cherry on the busy Oswald Gass Street. The ice cream shop quickly became famous with the locals. Nearby was the Iman hairdressing salon, and at the end of the building's lobby, a staircase led to apartments on the upper floors. There was also a basement entrance located under the stairs. Estibaliz and Holger made a large sum of money. However, he asked her to reimburse him for all the expenses they had spent in the first year of opening the ice cream shop. Estibaliz, ice cream shop owner, dedicated herself to her work and grow her store successfully. Meanwhile, her husband Holger has an interest in weapons technology, which causes more conflicts between the two. He asked her to join his Krishna religion, but she felt it was quite strange. In the end, she decided to follow this religion. Estibaliz's business has allowed her to get to know many people, including several men. Over the years, she had several lovers, some with her clients, others with suppliers, tourists, or neighbors. One of them was Manfred Hinterberger, 48, a representative of a company that manufactures industrial equipment, such as freezers, refrigerators, and ice cream machines. After many years of knowing each other, she started dating Manfred in 2008. She decides to divorce her husband, Holger, but he will only accept if she pays him the debt she owes. Since she did not want to pay the debts, they decided to live together in a small apartment. On April 27, 2008, after finishing the shift at the ice cream shop, Estibaliz returned home. Then, she had a heated argument with Holger. during which he hurled insults at her and accused her of cheating throughout their marriage. In a moment of anger, he threatened to take drastic action. While he was seated at the computer, facing away from her, she took the weapon and attacked him. After ensuring he was dead, she moved his body to the bathroom and left it there. She was sure the gunshots would be heard by the neighbors, which meant the police would soon arrive at her house. However, nothing happened. After waiting until nightfall, Estibaliz moved the body to the living room sofa and went to bed. 2 days later, she attempted to dispose of the body by setting it on fire. However, the smoke escaping from her apartment attracted attention, and a neighbor called the fire department. When they tried to enter her apartment, she stopped them, claiming everything was fine and that she had simply burned her lunch. A few days later, Estibaliz considered buying an electric saw. Although she didn't know how to use one, the store staff helped her learn. Upon returning home, she began dismembering the body, placing all the parts, including the head, into a bag and storing them in the freezer. Later, she transferred the remains into empty ice cream containers and covered them with cement. Next, she moved these containers to her ice cream shop and stored them in the basement freezer, where they were eventually discovered. Estibaliz's main motive for the crime was her frustration with her husband, Holger, refusing to move out of their apartment, and he refused divorce. Additionally, she had financial debts to him that she wanted to avoid repaying. As time passed, she continued to live her life normally, and no one seemed to notice Holger's disappearance. They had only been living in Austria for a short time, so they had very few friends here, so no one asked about him. If anyone asked about she will mention that he went to India. The regular customers at her ice cream shop didn't notice any change in her behavior, and no one suspected anything. Estibaliz's relationship with Manfred grew closer, and eventually they moved in together. She asked Manfred for money to help her business, and he gave her over $100,000, allowed her access to his bank accounts. However, he also wanted she to spend more time with him and to enhance her appearance. To achieve this, he pressured her to get plastic surgery, which she did not want. She had dreams of becoming a mother, but since he already had children, he couldn't help her fulfill that desire. Their relationship took a turn for the worse when Estibaliz discovered that Manfred had been having affairs with several other women. Feeling betrayed, she plotted her revenge. In preparation, she took shooting courses to improve the necessary skills. After completing the lessons, she felt ready to take action. To avoid leaving any evidence, she covered the floors and walls of their apartment with cling film. On the night of November 21, 2010, Estibaliz and Manfred returned from a joint trip and had sex. Afterward, she confronted he about his infidelity, but he denied it and fell asleep. In a moment of anger, she grabbed a gun and attacked him on the neck while he was sleeping. She left his body on the bed for the entire day before moving it to the bathroom. Using an electric saw, she cut the body into pieces, this time doing so with more care and skill. Estibaliz couldn't find any cement, so she decided to store the body parts in a refrigeration unit in the basement. However, the unit couldn't fit the entire body, leaving her to hide most of the remains in her apartment, where she covered them with cat litter to minimize the smell of decomposition. After taking care of this, she continued with her daily routine. Meanwhile, Manfred's relatives began to ask about his whereabouts. Estibaliz told them that he had left for Thailand. They believed her story and stopped asking further questions. Shortly after, Estibaliz met Ronald, an Austrian man. He became her lover and the father of her unborn child. It seemed like her life was getting better. After all, she had managed to evade the consequences of her previous actions. Who would suspect that this charming and friendly woman, known by everyone as kind-hearted, was capable of such deeds? One day, workers repairing the building next to the Estibaliz ice cream shop entered its basement to access the sewer and discovered a damaged pipe. The building's common drainage system is located in the storage rooms, which are separate small basements used for storage. As they entered the basement, they smelled rottenness mixed with cat litter deodorant, which piqued their curiosity. They traced the odor to two large freezers that appeared to have been abandoned for a long time. When they opened the freezers, they were shocked to find containers filled with cement. Inside one freezer, they saw a hand and a leg, in the other, a head. They also discovered two rifles with optical sights, a woman's handbag containing a pistol, a beret, and a notebook with notes in Spanish. Terrified, they quickly left the basement. They informed the hairdresser next door about the discovery, urging her to call the police. When the police arrived, they searched the basement and found the remains of two dismembered bodies. One was in several pieces, while the other was just a severed head, all encased in cement-filled containers. The remains were sent to the forensic medical examination in Vienna. During the initial investigation, authorities were unable to determine who owned the basement. This was because the basement had not been used for a long time, and no other suspicious items were discovered. Investigators began to analyze the evidence they had collected. The next day, after the police arrived at the crime scene, Estebalas came to work. A neighbor informed her about the discovery in the building's basement and mentioned that the police had started an investigation. This news made her extremely worried, forcing her to quickly return home. She locked the ice cream shop and put up a temporarily closed sign. As she left, her face betrayed her nervousness, looking very different from her usual demeanor. Naturally, her worried expression caught the attention of nearby residents, who began to mock her as she crossed the street towards the bus stop. They saw her take out her phone to make a call before getting into a taxi. Then, she went to the bank, withdrew all her money, and then purchased a plane ticket to Paris. However, she was never able to use this ticket. Austrian police were waiting for her at the airport. They were aware of the ticket she had purchased, but realized she had not checked in for her flight. Police issued a warrant for her arrest on Wednesday, June 8, 2011, after a search warrant was issued. Investigators believe the containers found in the basement belonged to her ice cream shop, but locating her became difficult since she had stopped using her mobile phone. Meanwhile, she remained in Vienna, took another taxi, and asked the driver to take her to northern Italy. She then traveled to the mountains and reached Basu, from where she continued on for another 6 kilometers to Talamadsu, where she decided to stay in a hotel for a few days. Before arriving, she asked the taxi driver to book a room for her because she couldn't do it herself. Later, the taxi driver saw her picture in the news and informed the police that he had driven her there. Unfortunately, by that time, it was already too late. In this city, Estebalas stayed for one night before taking a train to Udine, which is 50 kilometers from Almaty. There, she met Ivan, a street artist, who noticed her crying at a cafe and offered his help. When he approached her to ask if she needed help, she told him about her problems, especially her husband's cruelty that forced her to leave home. Ivan invited her to stay in his apartment for a few days. She agreed, and he offered her the couch while he slept in his bed. During her stay, Estebalas helped Ivan with cleaning, shopping, and cooking, and everything seemed fine, until he discovered her identity through a newspaper article. This revelation shocked and frightened him. He asked her to leave immediately, admitting that he knew she was evading the law. She denied his accusations. He then went to the nearest police station to inform them that Estebalas, a woman wanted by the authorities, was in his home. Ivan was surprised to find Estebalas waiting for the police at his house. She did not resist arrest. She was taken into custody as the primary suspect in several murders. She was arrested on June 10, 2011, at 7:30 a.m. in Udine, Italy. After her arrest, Estebalas was taken to the police station for questioning, where she confessed to 2 murders, one in 2008 and another in 2010. She used the same methods for both crimes, but claimed that the second murder was executed more skillfully. Meanwhile, Austrian authorities quickly requested her extradition, while in Italy, forensic experts identified the second victim as Manfred Hinterberger. During her interrogation, she attempted to justify her actions, saying that both men, Holger and Manfred, had subjected her to violence and cruelty. She felt very angry about the way they treated her. She described the murders as a response to the physical and psychological abuse she had suffered. Estibaliz admitted that she had attacked Holger and Manfred on the head, then used an electric saw. She told investigators that she killed the first man, Holger, to improve her skills. She took shooting lessons and take a course on how to work with cement to prepare for the second murder, Manfred. At the time of her arrest in Italy, she was pregnant with Ronald's child, and during a medical examination, it was revealed that she was 2 months along. 14 days after her arrest, on June 24, 2011, Estibaliz was extradited by an Austrian court and detained on suspicion of involvement in 2 murders. Her lawyer argued that although police testimony is considered legal evidence under Italian law, Austrian law is very different. He asked that it not be admitted as evidence in her case. He said he planned to sue several Austrian tabloids for making the accusations against her. Estibaliz was arrested and held in a prison in Vienna until January 11, 2012, when she was taken to the hospital to give birth. After her son was born, he was immediately given to his father. From the start of the trial, Estibaliz admitted her guilt, while the prosecution and psychiatrists portrayed her as a ruthless, manipulative, and selfish individual. Despite being educated and fluent in 3 languages, she committed extreme acts for her own benefit. The defense argued that Estibaliz was a victim of her own emotions. They claimed she was under the influence of illegal drugs and prescribed medications, stating she took 5 different drugs 3 times a day, including antidepressants and treatments for schizophrenia. However, evidence showed that her actions were intentional. She testified that Manfred pressured her to undergo numerous cosmetic surgeries, including nose jobs and Botox, and forced her to exercise constantly to maintain her figure, despite her long 12-hour shifts at the ice cream parlor. Estibaliz alleged that people mocked her, which became unbearable for her, and ultimately led to her decision to kill Manfred. The psychiatrist explained that she simply didn't know how to reject men who made her unhappy. She resorted to an extreme solution. She believed the easiest way to deal with men who were no longer needed was to kill them. Whenever men brought her trouble or ridiculed her, she concluded that killing them was the best option. On November 22, 2012, Estibaliz Carranza was found guilty of murdering Holger Holtz in 2008 and Manfred Hinterberger in 2010. She was sentenced to life imprisonment in a facility for the criminally insane. Along with her attorneys, she appealed the decision, but the sentence was upheld by the Higher Regional Court of Vienna on March 20, 2013. In November 2017, it was announced that Estibaliz would be transferred from a women's prison in Lower Austria to a prison in the market town of Upper Austria. She was diagnosed with a serious personality disorder. She exhibited abnormal behavior and had a mindset akin to a princess seeking rescue from a prince, longing for a fictional world where she was the center of attention. At the time of her crime, Estibaliz was mentally stable, as she was not under the influence of drugs and was fully aware of her actions. Psychiatrists expressed concern that she might commit serious crimes again after her release. During a psychiatric evaluation, she stated, "Some part of her brain is red, and when it activates, she can't control myself." Hello everyone. Today we will learn about case of Jade Panayiotou, who was found dead in 2015 in South Africa. The Jade Panayiotou case is one of the most shocking and publicized cases due to its seriousness and complex details. Jade's death was not only a tragic loss but also a wake-up call for marital issues, family conflicts, and motive for crime. In this article, we will explore the details of the case, from the initial context to the important developments and controversial outcome. This tragic story involves a married woman who was unaware of the love triangle she was caught in. The events took place in the city formerly known as Port Elizabeth, which was renamed in February 2021. However, we will refer to it by its old name since the incidents occurred before the renaming. Port Elizabeth is known for its beautiful coastal attractions that draw both local and international tourists. The city also features numerous shopping malls and bars. Additionally, it is unique in South Africa for its diverse wildlife, where you can encounter some of the country's largest animals, including the whale shark, leopard, lion, buffalo, rhinoceros, and elephant. In 2004, an 18-year-old named Christopher Panayotou lived in Port Elizabeth after finishing his schooling. Eager to apply his business skills, he sought opportunities within his father's business, which included several stores in the city, such as Bambi's Diner on Market Street. Christopher was known to be a hard worker with a strong sense for business. At a friend's party, Christopher met an appealing girl named Jade, who was also 18. They chat and quickly began dating, falling in love. Jade was a cheerful and kind-hearted individual, aspiring to become a teacher. In 2005, she enrolled in university, and over the next few years, their relationship deepened as they learned more about each other's dreams. While Jade focused on her studies, Christopher launched his first business, a local grocery store in Algoa Park, followed by a second venture, a restaurant and cocktail bar called Infinity, located nearby. By 2011, the couple appeared more serious. Jade graduated and landed a job at a local elementary school while Christopher's businesses thrived. Eventually, Christopher proposed to Jade. They became officially engaged and moved in together. Unfortunately, their happiness was short-lived, as Christopher was involved in an affair at his store, which Jade remained unaware of. 2 years prior to these events, Christopher hired a young woman named Chanel Coots. Initially, their relationship was strictly professional, but by 2012, everything changed. Christopher and Chanel began a secret affair. Not long after, their co-workers noticed extraordinary signs of affection between them. The couple spent nights together in local hotels. And whenever Jade was away, Christopher would invite Chanel to his home. It is unclear how long this affair would have continued, but Christopher's father, Konstantinos Panayotou, eventually discovered the situation. Konstantinos was furious because he had seen Jade as a future daughter-in-law. Over the 8 years he had known her, Konstantinos had come to appreciate Jade's dedication, hard work, and kindness, he recognizing her potential. So, Konstantinos threatened to disinherit Christopher if he did not end the affair or leave Jade for Chanel. As a successful businessman in Port Elizabeth, Konstantinos intended for his business to be passed down to Christopher, who was just beginning his career. After a heated discussion with his father, Christopher promised to end things with Chanel, but he did not follow through, and their affair continued even more intensely. Throughout this time, Jade remained completely unaware of what was happening. Eventually, he and Jade officially married in 2012, becoming Mr. and Mrs. Panayotou. They appeared to be a beautiful couple that many envied, but soon circumstances would change their lives dramatically. Jade received great news. She got a teaching position at a nearby college. In contrast, Christopher's business has been struggling. Revenues in his store and restaurant decreased, with financial indicators were in the red for several months. This has made it difficult for he to support both women in his life. He spent a lot on expensive gifts for Chanel, covered hotel stays, and even bought gifts for his mistress's best friend to keep her silent about their relationship. These significant expenses have impacted his bank account, prompting him to work longer hours to make ends meet. From 2012 to 2015, Christopher grew increasingly distant from his wife, Jade. Business consumed much of his time and energy as he worked to establish it. He felt he always had a reason to be at his store and focused on work. Jade began to realize that she was feeling lonely. Her husband had little time for her. When she spoke with friends, she mentioned how rarely she saw Christopher, and when he was home, he seemed preoccupied with other thoughts. Jade tried to encourage him to have dinner at home, and even she visited the store to spend time together, but these efforts were insufficient. By September 2014, she recognized that her self-control was slipping and that she was on the verge of a breakdown. On September 21, Jade wrote a letter to herself expressing her feelings. In it, she conveyed her longing for love and a husband who would prioritize her, care for her. She questioned why she couldn't find happiness and why Christopher seemed to hide so much from her, making communication difficult. She felt as though her heart had been taken from her, or was in pieces. Writing this letter helped her realize she loved Christopher and how much she wanted to spend time with him. Those close to Jade noticed her loneliness. One day, a best friend was asked by Christopher for birthday gift ideas. She suggested that Jade just wanted to have quality time with him. He recognized the issues in his relationship with Jade, but he still was focused on his business. And he was also distracted by thoughts of another woman. On April 21, 2015, Jade went missing. It was a Tuesday, a normal working day for her. She was expected at work at the college, which was 40 minutes away by car from her home in Wall Glen. Typically, Jade would carpool with her friend and colleague Sherry, and this day should have been no different. Jade left her house at 6:15 a.m. to wait for her friend. However, when Sherry arrived, Jade was not there. Her phone went unanswered, and no one responded to the doorbell. Concerned, Sherry decided to call the police. By 10 a.m., a missing person notice was shared on social media, and many news outlets began reporting on the situation. The police launched a large-scale search that same day, deploying multiple teams and canine units. However, by sunset, they still had no leads on Jade's whereabouts. In that situation, her family offered a reward of 50,000 rand for any information that could help find her, which increased to 150,000 rand by nightfall, as the search for Jade intensified thanks to the efforts of volunteers and caring individuals. Tragic news emerged at 10:00 in the morning. A police officer reported that, with the help of his canine unit, he had found a body located in an overgrown area near a gravel road, not far from Quana Bush. Unfortunately, forensic experts quickly confirmed that the body was indeed Jade's. She was fully clothed and had suffered attacked by force wounds with 2 to the back and 1 to the head. Additionally, her bank cards and jewelry were missing. Relatives were deeply saddened by the news. Friends and relatives openly wept. Jade's sister nearly fainted when the news reached her. Christopher was there at the time. Students and colleagues mourned the loss of their kind and caring teacher. The heartbreak resonated throughout South Africa and was widely shared on social media. However, one of the most important and pressing questions about Jade's death still needed to be answered. Why did Jade have to die? There appeared to be no clear motive for her murder. The very next day, the police published 2 pictures from surveillance cameras and discovered that, on the day of Jade's death, her bank cards had been used in 2 different locations. The cameras recorded 2 images, but none of Jade's relatives recognized the individuals in the photos. A week later, family and friends gathered for Jade's funeral at a Catholic church in Newton Park. Many people attended to share their grief and say their goodbyes, including numerous students and all of her relatives. Everybody were moved by the heartfelt tributes to Jade, the late wife of Christopher. Meanwhile, Christopher's display of sadness seemed odd and insincere. The investigators was revealed that his expressions of despair had been carefully rehearsed. They think Christopher searched through Google for the text of a farewell speech and came across a dedication from Charles Atkins to his own late wife, so the two speeches have a lot in common. While borrowing someone else's speech was inappropriate, it didn't necessarily indicate Christopher's guilt. He was simply struggling to express genuine feelings. Meanwhile, other worrying developments were happening to him. One day before the funeral, the police arrested a man named Sione in connection with Jade's murder. Sione was identified as a bouncer at Christopher's nightclub. Rumors began to circulate that Sione had either orchestrated the crime and confessed while in custody. Another rumor that he claimed Christopher had asked him to hire a hitman to kill Jade, although Sione would not have committed the crime himself, but he knew a couple of friends who might agree to such this request. That marked a significant breakthrough in the investigation. But there was still no evidence linking Christopher to the crime. The police needed more than just rumors to substantiate the serious accusation against him. To gather more evidence, the police devised a plan. They would release Sione from custody on the condition that he speak with Christopher, record any confession regarding the murder of Jade. In exchange, the police promised to ease Sione's sentence and negotiate on many other issues. The next day, Sione called Christopher, and their conversation led the police to draw important conclusions. Christopher was arrested 2 hours after the phone call. Following this new information, 3 additional suspects were apprehended. While Christopher denied any involvement in his wife's death, the investigation revealed that he had asked his bodyguard from the club to arrange the murder. Sione had then recruited 3 hitmen for the task. Christopher instructed them to execute the plan early in the morning at 6:30, while Jade was waiting for a co-worker who was supposed to drive her to work. He intended to stage the murder as a robbery at the Glen Walls gates, planning to steal all her possessions. The execution date was originally set for April 20, 2015. However, while the hired killers were preparing to carry out the order, one of their girlfriends showed up, prompting them to postpone the execution to another day. This delay upset Christopher, who insisted that the execution take place as soon as possible. Therefore, the following day was scheduled. On April 21, Jade arrived outside her village at 6:15 a.m., where 3 killers were already waiting in a rented car just a short distance away. They decided against killing her immediately due to concerns about potential witnesses. Instead, they opted to kidnap her and take her to a different location to carry out the murder. Jade was taken to the back seat of the car, which drove northwest from the village for about 30 minutes. Upon arrival, the killers pulled her from the car and attacked her 3 times by force. She died from the 3rd bullet. One of the criminals then went to a nearby ATM and withdrew 1,000 rand, approximately $100. Later that day, they attempted to withdraw cash again, but the transaction failed due to an incorrect PIN. Both withdrawal attempts were recorded on surveillance cameras. The magistrate's court will try all 4 criminals together, excluding the bouncer Sione, who has already faced a different punishment. Mysteriously, before the trial began, one of the hitmen died, leaving the remaining 2 and Christopher to face charges for the crime. On October 11, 2015, the trial against Christopher and 2 mercenaries began. The prosecution argued that Christopher murdered Jade because he could not afford to support both his wife and his mistress, leading him to want her out of the picture. In contrast, Christopher's defense claimed that he had a kind heart and would never commit such an act, especially since he had just bought a new house for himself and Jade. They asserted that Christopher had no reason to kill his wife. Christopher's mistress, Chanel, testified about the expensive gifts he had given her and confirmed that she had spent the night with him in the penthouse while Jade was away. Evidence was presented showing also their illicit encounters at local hotels. The prosecution presented various pieces of evidence, including phone calls between the hired killers and Christopher's bouncers, ATM photos, GPS coordinates, hidden cars, and other incriminating materials. On November 2, 2017, when turned 31, Christopher Panayotou was found guilty of murdering his wife. Investigative agency was revealed that he was seeking a loan of 2.5 million rand, which he had no intention of using for his wife or mistress. The judge concluded Christopher regretted his marriage to Jade, so killed her to cut costs and reduce his ever-growing debt. Because of his cruel actions, the judge sentenced Christopher to life in prison without mercy. The two hired killers also received life sentences, while Sioni awaited his own sentence. Unfortunately, Luthando Sioni's testimony was hostile. After a series of trials, Sioni was convicted by the Gqeberha High Court on 25 November 2021 and was sentenced to life imprisonment on 26 November 2021. The story ultimately focuses on themes of betrayal and greed. Jade was a genuinely good person with a heart of gold. She was dedicated to her cause and the people around her, always maintaining a positive attitude, a vibrant personality, and a beautiful smile. She deserved much more in life than what her husband took from her. On December 9, 2019, Christopher's father, who opposed his son's affair with Chanel, tragically lost his life. He was shot multiple times near his store while closing for the night, and his car was stolen. The murder of Christopher Panayotou overshadowed earlier events and devastated two families. This tragedy stemmed from the actions of a selfish man who prioritized his pride and money over his wife's life. It remains uncertain whether he bears responsibility for his father's death. Society hopes that Christopher will spend the rest of his life in prison, filled with regret and despair. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case, the case of Roxanne Wood. The only evidence found at the crime scene was a drop of semen. It took 35 years for the victim's relatives to discover who brutally took the life of their loved one. Roxanne Woods was born on April 15, 1956, in the small town of Nels, Michigan. She was the first child in the family, followed by younger sister Janet. When Roxanne was 16, her younger brother Brad was born. Then their parents' marriage began to deteriorate. When Brad was 2 years old, her parents separated and filed for divorce. The children had to split their time between their mother's and father's homes. So Roxanne took on the role of caring for and comforting her younger siblings, Janet and Brad. Roxanne had a challenging life, but she was cheerful, friendly, and sociable as she grew up. After completing her studies at the age of 17, she started working as a manager at a small company that manufactured steel tanks, specifically in the customer service department. One day, a handsome young man came to the office. When she first saw him, Roxanne complimented him, then they had a conversation. The young man's name was Terry Wood, and he was the boss's son. When Roxanne got home after work, she excitedly told younger sister that it was the happiest day of her life because she had met a wonderful boy and had fallen in love with him at first sight. Roxanne and Terry began dating, and 8 years later, in 1982, they got married. The couple settled into a home in their hometown of Nels, Michigan. Both worked as managers in the customer service department of Terry's father's company. Their daily routine consisted of waking up, having breakfast, and going to work together in the same office. They would return home for lunch, take a break, go back to work, and then come home together in the evening. Roxanne tells Terry that she feels suffocated by their constant togetherness. She believes that it is damaging their relationship, leading to boring arguments. Roxanne left her father-in-law's company and found a job as a manager at a plastic parts manufacturer in South Bend, Indiana. The brief separation during the day helped her and her husband maintain their relationship, and everything was going well. They began to live a normal life together. In her free time, Roxanne enjoyed cooking and often baked a variety of sweet pastries. She also loved growing roses in their yard, as she appreciated creating beauty around her. 5 years passed, and during this time, the Roxanne family remained childless. The couple continued to live together, work and manage the household, unaware of the tragic fate that awaited them. On Thursday, February 19, 1987, Roxanne and Terry went to work as usual. In the evening, they each drove separately to a restaurant in downtown Niles to meet for dinner. After dinner, they decided to relax at a local bowling club with some friends. When Roxanne entered the club with Terry, she quickly attracted the attention of everyone around her because of her attractiveness and elegance. The couple enjoyed a night of bowling at the club, which was mostly filled with men. After 11 o'clock, Roxanne told her husband that it was time to go home because she had to get up early for work the next day. Terry wanted to stay and play one last round. Roxanne hugged him, kissed him, and said she was going home. Terry said goodbye and reminded her to drive carefully. Roxanne left alone while Terry stayed at the club to play one more round before driving home. He returned home about 45 minutes after Roxanne and assumed she was asleep. Terry parked his car in the garage and went into the kitchen. Terry witnessed a horrifying scene. His wife, Roxanne, lying on the floor in a pool of blood, her panties down to her ankles. Terry rushed to her side, hoping she was still alive. He lifted her head and tried to check her pulse, but quickly realized she was dead. In a panic, he rushed to the phone. He slipped on the bloody floor but managed to stay on his feet. He called the local police station and shouted into the phone, saying that his wife was dead in the house. Terry screamed and asked the police to come quickly, right now. The police asked Terry to calm down because they did not understand what he was saying. Terry's aggressive behavior on the phone was alarming, and when the police arrived at the Terry family home, Roxanne's death caused him to explode in rage, screaming uncontrollably. The police were forced to put him in the back of a patrol car and take him to the station for questioning. When they arrived, Terry immediately requested a lawyer, which raised further suspicions among the police. The autopsy revealed that 30-year-old Roxanne Wood had died from a stab wound to the neck. Forensic experts found only one piece of evidence at the crime scene, a drop of semen. In 1987, DNA testing had not been conducted, so the evidence was stored in the archives. During their search of the house, police found no signs of forced entry. Terry told police that they had a problem with the back door of their home, saying it was not working properly. Roxanne was found on the floor next to the kitchen cabinets, and the cutlery drawer was open. A fillet knife was missing, leading police to believe that it was the weapon used in the crime. Police found it strange that an intruder could enter the home without a weapon. When police looked into Roxanne's case, all information pointed to her husband, Terry, as the suspect. The investigation into the couple revealed that both Terry and Roxanne had been unfaithful to each other. When the police discovered this, they considered jealousy as a possible motive for the crime, especially on Terry's part. However, Roxanne's relatives did not believe Terry was capable of such violence. Although they acknowledged that he could be rude, yell, and insult others, they did not think he would commit such a brutal act. They believed that someone else was responsible for the crime. Despite their suspicions, the prosecutor's office determined that there was insufficient evidence to charge Terry with Roxanne's death. After the investigation, there were still no new clues, so the investigation was stalled. For many years, the case remained unsolved. Many Nelson residents blamed Terry for Roxanne's death. He was often cursed in public, with people calling him a beast and a monster. Despite this, Terry continued to live in Nelson, working for his father's company, keeping his personal life private and avoiding contact with journalists. A year after the tragedy, in 1988, Roxanne's younger sister Janet married Terry's brother, Robert Wood, who also worked at their father's steel tank manufacturing company. Janet and Robert were the only ones still actively searching for the criminal, even though the police had given up and believed the case would never be solved. In 1999, there was a significant development in DNA research related to the Roxanne Wood case, which had stagnated for 12 years. A DNA sample from the crime scene was added to the National DNA database, but no matches were found. Terry, Roxanne's husband, agreed to provide his DNA for comparison, but it also did not match the sample from the crime scene. 20 years went by, during which a significant amount of information was gathered regarding the case. In 2020, police brought in a professor and a group of students from Western Michigan University to digitize the case materials and enter them into an electronic database. The students worked on roughly 3,500 pages of handwritten reports, notes, and other relevant information. The professor noted that after 30 years of collecting data, police may have overlooked important details during the investigation. Around the same time the students started digitizing the data, the police investigating Roxanne's case reached out to a company that specializes in genetic genealogy. However, a new issue arose. The semen samples from the crime scene were poorly preserved. The usable portion was only about 3% of the amount normally needed for research. They had never worked with such a small amount before. However, the researchers still tried to identify the criminal's DNA. The experts spent about 10 months on the project, but were ultimately unable to produce any results. Their efforts were in vain. The president of the genealogy company was very upset about the failure of the project. One day, the president of the genealogy company discussed this issue with his employee, Gabriela Vargas, and asked her to take over the project, promising to support its progress. In April 2021, Gabriela began her work. Colleagues considered Gabriela to be one of the most talented researchers in genetics. A few months later, Gabriela created a genetic profile using DNA analysis. She quickly discovered that the man was of Balkan Caucasian origin. Using the online service GetMac, Gabriela was able to build the criminal's family tree. Police identified the killer's parents, a couple born around 1920 who had 3 sons. This meant their sons were likely born in the 1940s and 1950s. With information from Gabriela, police quickly identified 3 brothers, eliminating 2 as suspects. That left only one brother, who had a significant criminal record. Michigan State Police believe they have finally identified Roxanne Wood's killer after 34 years, Patrick Gilham. In 2021, Patrick Gilham, 66, lived just a few miles from Roxanne Wood in South Bend, Indiana, where she also worked. Patrick was an alcoholic and a drug addict. When police looked into his criminal record, they discovered that 8 years before Roxanne was murdered, he had been charged with assaulting another woman. Back in 1979, a young mother named Maureen Farrick lived in Gary, Indiana, with her husband Robert and their 2 daughters, ages 3 and 2. Maureen was an art teacher at a local high school. Robert described his wife as beautiful, kind, and social, always ready to help others. In September 1979, as Robert's business trip was coming to an end, he planned to return home late that evening. He called his wife, informing her that he didn't have the house keys, and asked her to leave the side door unlocked for him. After 11 p.m., as Robert was walking home, he noticed several police cars parked near his house. Maureen ran out and told him that a stranger had attacked her that night. She was sleeping on the 2nd floor with her daughters when she heard noises coming from downstairs. Concerned, she decided to investigate and went downstairs to see what was going on. She noticed a man going through her purse. When he saw her, he pushed her to the ground near the stairs and tried to attack her, but he was unsuccessful. He eventually stole her purse and escaped. Maureen remained silent throughout the incident. fearing that her daughters, who were sleeping on the second floor, would wake up. After the attacker left, she called the police and provided a description of him. About a week later, Patrick, 24, was stopped by police for a traffic violation. An officer noticed credit cards next to him that belonged to Maureen Farrick. Patrick was arrested and taken to the police station. During questioning, he explained that he had entered Maureen's house through an open side door and that he had stolen her purse. In 1979, Patrick Gillum was charged with burglary and unlawful deviant behavior. He pleaded guilty at his trial and was sentenced to 14 years in prison. However, he served only 7 years in an Indiana prison before being released on parole for good behavior. In 2021, police began searching for Patrick Gillum to collect a DNA sample to compare with the profile of the criminal in Roxanne's case. In May 2021, they found Patrick Gillum, 66, in South Bend, Indiana. While driving his pickup truck, he threw a cigarette butt out the window. Police took the cigarette butt, which contained his saliva, and sent it for analysis. A few days later, the test results did not match, surprising the police. They were certain that Patrick was involved in Roxanne Wood's case. They then decided to take another DNA sample from Patrick, suspecting that they might have accidentally taken the wrong cigarette butt. In July 2021, Patrick was under continuous observation. One day, he visited a laundromat, and a police watching him decided to wait nearby, believing Patrick would eventually come out. The police positioned himself on the sidewalk next to the laundromat. His prediction came true when Patrick stepped outside, lit a cigarette, and sat just a meter away from police, unaware that he was being watched. The police greeted Patrick and they exchanged a few words. After about 2 minutes, Patrick returned to the laundromat, leaving behind a cigarette butt. The police collected the cigarette butt with gloves, bagged it, and sent it for forensic analysis. The analysis showed a near 100% match, but the police decided not to immediately arrest Patrick. Instead, they planned to bring him in for questioning. Patrick was told that the police needed to discuss an old case with him. During Patrick's questioning, the police asked him if he knew anyone named Roxanne. He replied that he knew 2 people by that name. One was a stripper, and the other was an alcoholic. They then showed him a picture of Roxanne and asked if he recognized her. He said he had never met her. They showed him both old and new pictures, but he continued to deny ever seeing her. When the police informed Patrick of what had happened to Roxanne, he became anxious. His body tensed, his hands shook, and he slammed his hands on the table, seemingly hoping that the interrogation would end. Throughout the interrogation, Patrick maintained his innocence, often answering questions with phrases like, "He don't remember" or "He don't know." The interrogation lasted for 5.5 hours. Eventually, Patrick stated that he needed a lawyer and he was allowed to go home. 7 months later, in February 2022, Patrick was arrested at his home in South Bend, Indiana. Around the same time, nearly all local media reported on the reopening of this high-profile case. Following this, a woman contacted the police to share a story she had kept to herself for nearly 35 years. In the summer of 1987, just a few months after Roxanne Wood's death, Patrick attempted to attack another victim in South Bend. It was an evening when Rose Perel decided to water her garden. While she was outside with a hose, she heard a car drive by. A Chevrolet El Camino stopped near her house. Rose initially ignored it, but when she finished watering and turned to go inside, she noticed a man wearing a black baseball cap and a black beard getting out of the car and walking toward her. Rose sensed that the stranger intended to harm her, so instead of returning to her house, she ran to her neighbors for safety. Thankfully, they quickly opened the door and allowed her in. Trembling with fear, Rose called the police, but by that time, the unknown man had already disappeared. A few days later, While driving around town with her husband, Rose spotted the same Chevrolet El Camino parked at a gas station. There was nobody inside the vehicle. Rose's husband decided to keep watch over the empty car while she went to find a phone to call the police. When Rose returned, she found her husband confronting the stranger. Her husband held a gun and told him to stay put. The man was 32 years old, with dark hair and a thick beard. Rose asked him to show her his driver's license. She read out his name, Patrick Gilham. Rose and her husband then allowed Patrick to leave, but warned him that they would use force if he came near their home again. Rose then went to the local police station and reported her situation, also naming Patrick Gilham. She never saw him again and believes the police took no action. It wasn't until 35 years later that Rose recognized Patrick on the news and decided to share her story. She believes that if the police had taken her testimony seriously in 1987, the Roxanne Wood case could have been solved much sooner. In April 2022, Patrick's trial finally occurred. He did not confess to the crime and claimed he had no memory of the events. When Janet Wood spoke during the trial, Patrick appeared horrified as he looked at her. Janet and Roxanne resembled each other closely, leading some to believe that Patrick thought he was face-to-face with Roxanne, which frightened him. Ultimately, Patrick Gilham was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 19 years. All suspicion was cleared against Roxanne's husband, Terry Wood. Terry was emotional and confused, crying in the courtroom. For 35 years, he had been the prime suspect in his wife's murder, and now justice had been served. He continued to avoid the press and kept his private life private. Roxanne's family finally found peace. Her siblings Janet and Brad were relieved to learn the truth. Janet shared that after the trial, she had a dream in which she and Roxanne were walking near the cemetery gates. They were laughing and talking, as Roxanne told Janet that it was time for her to leave. She reassured her loved ones not to worry or cry, saying that she was fine. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Norma Rodriguez. Norma Rodriguez was born on November 16, 1960, in the small town of Mercedes, Texas, which has a population of about 15,000. The town is located near the southern border of the United States. Norma grew up in a family of 6 siblings, and they had a close bond. Norma was quiet and reserved, often staying out of trouble. When Norma was about 12 years old, her family moved to California, settling in the suburbs of Oxnard. The family hoped that this move would bring them better opportunities. The bustling life in California was a stark contrast to the quiet rural life they had known in Texas. Norma especially loved the beaches and sunsets. After graduating from high school in 1980, Norma chose to attend college in Oxnard, near her family. There she met Tony Rodriguez, a sophomore who became her first love. They dated for nearly 2 years before marrying on March 6, 1981, both at the age of 21. Later that year, she gave birth to her first child, a son named Andrew. In 1989, they welcomed another son, Austin. However, in 1991, Norma's marriage began to suffer. The couple argued more frequently, and Tony spent more time away from home on business trips. His constant absences left Norma with all the responsibilities of the family, children, and work. She often confided to her childhood friend Teresa that although Tony had no problem with alcohol, he often lost control during their arguments, sometimes becoming aggressive towards her and their eldest son. Norma did not want to be a single mother, but she realized that living with an aggressive man was becoming unsafe. After another incident, she and her 2 sons moved to an apartment just a 10-minute drive from Tony's home. Norma did not file for divorce. choosing to maintain a relationship with her husband to avoid hurting the children. Her apartment was in Port Hueneme. Norma was particularly fond of the local park, where she enjoyed walking with her children every evening. Neighbors described her as friendly, but somewhat reserved, often keeping her distance from others to focus on her sons. After the separation, Norma worked very hard to provide for her children. Although exhausted, she found comfort in her children. In March 1993, Norma began dating a mechanic named Daniel, who was also a coach in the junior league that her 11-year-old son Andrew was a member of. They met at a party. The couple enjoyed spending time together, often going for walks in the local park, sometimes with her sons. Friends and family considered the relationship to be the happiness Norma had long longed for. It seemed that she had finally found joy again after a difficult breakup with her husband. Although things seemed to be going well for the couple, Daniel announced that they were splitting up. The news was a painful shock to Norma, who had not anticipated such an event. Daniel explains that he wants to reconnect with his ex-girlfriend, whom he has just gotten back together. Norma is deeply hurt. To take her mind off things, she decides to have a barbecue at her house on Saturday, May 29, 1993. She invites guests, including her sisters and her friend Beatrice, to help her relax and enjoy the weekend. On Sunday, May 30, she spends the day with her 4-year-old son Austin. They mostly watch TV together while Andrew is in Oxnard with his father. Andrew is scheduled to return home the next day. In the evening, Norma receives a call from Beatrice, who suggests going to the beach the next day. Since Norma has no other plans, she thinks it would be a good way to forget about the difficult breakup with Daniel. The next morning, the police receive a distressed call from Tony Rodriguez. He reports that he has found his ex-wife Norma dead in her home. The police immediately went to Norma's house. When the police arrived at the house, they found Tony, his cousin Hector, and Norma's 2 sons waiting in the private entrance. In the living room, Norma was found lying on the floor. There were no visible injuries on her body. However, her head was wrapped tightly with tape. The police noticed that her clothes were unbuttoned. Her body was later sent for an autopsy. The police believe that Norma may have known the killer, as her face was completely covered with opaque tape. This may have been to prevent her from seeing the face of her attacker. At the crime scene, there were no signs of a struggle or forced entry. Forensic experts did not find any blood. The only item on the floor near the body was a set of house keys. Valuables were still in the house. The police devoted all their efforts to the investigation. Experts from neighboring cities were summoned, and forensic experts thoroughly examined the crime scene. But they did not find any useful evidence. Norma's sister, Auralia, tried to contact Norma in the morning and could not reach her, so she decided to go check on Norma. Auralia was shocked to see yellow tape surrounding Norma's house. Auralia later reported to the police that Norma had a troubled relationship with Tony and that she had no other enemies. The police quickly focused on this information, knowing that Tony was the one who called the police to report the case. Tony was then invited to the police station for questioning. Tony acted like a grieving husband, and although they had broken up long before these events, he seemed to still have feelings for her. He said that on June 1, he went to Norma's apartment at around 7:30 a.m., as they had previously arranged. He was supposed to take the children to school, maintaining the parenting routine they had established after their separation. Tony was accompanied by his brother Hector, who waited outside in the pickup while Tony went to pick up the children. He knocked on the door, but got no answer. Tony found the house unusually quiet and no one answered his calls. He grew increasingly worried, fearing that something was wrong, but he did not have his own key to the house. He used his bank card to wedge it between the door and the wall, successfully unlocking it. Once inside, he called Norma but got no answer. In the living room, he discovered her body, noticing that her head was bandaged and her shorts were unbuttoned. Panicking, Tony ran outside to call his brother Hector. When they returned home, the noise woke Austin, who went out to the living room and found his mother unconscious. Austin was then quickly taken back to his room. Hector, upon seeing the situation, touched Norma's body and felt that it was still warm. He quickly took scissors from the truck and tried to cut the tape covering Norma's nose and mouth, hoping that she could breathe. After removing the tape, Hector realized that Norma was not breathing and had no pulse. In fact, Norma had been dead for some time, and Hector could not feel the warmth, but he assumed that this was due to shock and natural reactions. Tony and Hector accidentally destroyed a lot of evidence and contaminated the shoe prints and DNA samples. The police suspected that Tony had a motive for the murder, as he had just separated from Norma and was very unhappy about her new relationship. In addition, there may have been a conflict over child custody and child support because the children were living with their mother. Norma's sisters reported that she was unhappy with Tony's frequent visits and constant attempts to control her. He claimed that his actions stemmed from his desire to see and communicate with his children. However, according to Norma's relatives, he repeatedly asked to meet and hoped to mend the relationship, which only frustrated Norma and led to arguments. Hector and Tony were asked to take a lie detector test, which they agreed to and completed without any problems. Initially, the police believed that these men were involved in the incident, but after the polygraph results came back, they had to release them. The investigation then shifted its focus to other people close to Norma. After the autopsy, the medical examiner determined that there was no evidence of abuse. Although Norma's clothes were unbuttoned, this may have been an attempt to mislead the police. Norma's head was wrapped in duct tape 14 times. Police collected material from under Norma's fingernails and from duct tape, as they believed that the killer's fingerprints might be on these items. Unfortunately, the technology available in the 1990s did not allow for comprehensive DNA analysis. Although all the evidence collected was preserved, it could not provide any useful information at the time. The police decided to interview the children. Andrew, the eldest son, said that when his father brought him home on the evening of the 31st, he was also unable to contact his mother. However, he noticed that the window was open enough for him to enter the house. It was late, and he was surprised to see his younger brother Austin still awake. When Andrew asked why Austin wasn't sleeping, Austin replied that his mother wasn't feeling well and had a bandage on her head, so he was waiting for her to feel better. Andrew thought his mother had simply gone to sleep, as she usually rested in the living room. Andrew put his younger brother to bed and lay down to avoid disturbing his mother. Initially, the police thought that talking to a 4-year-old might not yield useful information. However, the boy surprisingly shared many details. He spoke to the police while a child psychologist was present. According to Austin, that evening, his mother opened the door to a man who introduced himself as Corey. The man had dark skin and an argument broke out between them. Austin witnessed the stranger attack his mother and wrap duct tape around her head. 10 days later, Austin shared new details. This time, he claimed that a light-skinned man named Warren had entered through the kitchen door and was responsible for wrapping duct tape around Norma's head. This left the police baffled, as there was no evidence that more than one person was involved in Norma's attack. Ultimately, it was believed that the interaction between family members after the murder could have distorted the child's memory. The police quickly discovered that the suspects were Corey and Warren. Norma's relatives knew this as well. Norma had worked with them for a long time and had a friendly relationship with them. However, Corey Davis was not present at the party that Norma hosted. He lived about a 20-minute walk away. It was known that he had feelings for her and asked her out on several occasions, but she refused. After being rejected, he persisted and would show up at Norma's house uninvited. Norma had no romantic feelings for Corey, but was reluctant to reject him outright to avoid hurting him. Most witnesses described Corey as calm and kind, although some found him a little strange. Warren confirmed that he had attended a party hosted by Norma. He said that they chatted until everyone else left, and he watched TV for a while, before going home around 10:30 p.m. The next day, he met up with friends in Santa Barbara. Warren denied any involvement in the murder and described his relationship with Norma as purely platonic, insisting that he had no romantic feelings for her. His friends later backed up his claim. Corey Davis, who worked with Norma, also denied any romantic relationship with her, explaining that they only interacted at work. He was at home with his parents on the night of the murder. The police noticed that Corey acted nervous during the interrogation and was reluctant to cooperate. Despite this behavior, there was nothing particularly alarming that caught the attention of the police. The police then proceeded to interview people close to Norma. Her friend Beatrice mentioned that at the barbecue before her death, Norma had expressed concern about losing her house keys. Interestingly, those keys were found next to her body when the police arrived. This discovery seemed important. The police decided to question Corey again, so they went to the address he had provided. They discovered that he had given them a false address and that he lived elsewhere. The police then decided to conduct lie detector tests on Corey and Warren. To the police's surprise, both passed the tests without any problems. The case seemed to have reached a dead end. However, there is still one more suspect on the list: Norma's ex-boyfriend, Daniel. He insists that there was nothing wrong with their relationship, saying that he and Norma broke up a long time ago and remained friends. He is now in a new relationship and has no conflicts with Norma. He denies any wrongdoing and his alibi has been verified. Daniel successfully passed a lie detector test, leaving the investigation with no suspects. The police decide to review the case and talk to Norma's friend Beatrice again. This friend reveals that she had a close relationship with Norma. Beatrice had told Norma about her affair, which was going on behind her husband's back. Norma had let Beatrice use her house so she could meet her lover, even giving her a key for easy access. This led the police to suspect that Beatrice's husband might be seeking revenge, or that it might be Beatrice's lover. Now the police had two new suspects to investigate. First, they spoke to Beatrice's husband, but he had a confirmed alibi. The police then met with Beatrice's lover, but he was also quickly eliminated as a suspect. The situation became more serious when the police found the body of a second victim, 26 days after Norma's murder. The new victim was Beatrice Felice, an 87-year-old deaf-mute woman who was not a friend of Norma's. She was found stabbed to death in her bed at a nursing home a few blocks from Norma's apartment. A month later, on August 5, 40-year-old Cynthia Berger was found dead in a burning house. After firefighters arrived, they discovered Cynthia's body in the bathroom. Cynthia had been strangled and eventually died from smoke inhalation. The situation has shaken the police station in a small town that has never had a crime scene before. Now, 3 murders in quick succession suggest that a serial killer may be involved. The police are overwhelmed and need to stop the killer immediately. Meanwhile, public pressure mounts as locals hold memorials to honor the victims and raise awareness of the tragedies. Since the town was unprepared for such a large volume of crime, an FBI agent is brought in who specializes in psychological profiling of criminals. In 1995, the police received information about a man suspected of killing at least 5 women in the United States. The man was identified as Glenn Edward Rogers, 30 years old, whose previous crimes were similar to those that occurred in the local area. Glenn was convicted of first-degree murder of 2 women, one in Florida in 1997 and another in California in June 1999. After Glenn was arrested, he claimed he was in California at the time of the crime. The Port Hue violence stopped after the third victim died. The situation changed dramatically in 2000 with the advent of new forensic technology. By 2002, the DNA collected was analyzed, but the police database showed no matches. However, in 2003, after further analysis, a forensic scientist found a match. The DNA under Norma's fingernails belonged to Warren Mackey, 39, a former co-worker of Norma's. Although he was able to pass a polygraph test, something often done by hardened criminals without emotion, Warren lied about his plans on the evening of the murder and even convinced friends to support his false alibi. Police were amazed by Warren's ability to deceive people. On August 27, 2003, Warren Mackey was arrested during questioning. He was given one last chance to confess, but he continued to deny his involvement and soon asked for a lawyer, refusing to cooperate further with the investigation. Warren was charged with murder. A preliminary hearing took place on March 2, 2004. The Supreme Court questioned whether the case should be classified as first or second-degree murder. The situation was resolved on January 10, 2005, when Warren agreed to a plea deal with the prosecution and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. In his confession, he said he had been under the influence of alcohol and drugs that night, which affected his memory of the events. Warren Mackey, then 40, was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. As part of the agreement, he was not allowed to file any appeals. Soon after serving the required minimum time, he began asking for parole, but all of his requests were denied, largely due to the active involvement of Norma's family. 2 other murders that occurred around the same time were determined to be unrelated to Warren.